Chapter 1: The Architecture of Influence: How Media Consolidation Shapes What You See. In the pre-dawn hours of newsrooms across America, assignment editors scan wire services, review overnight developments, and make decisions that will shape how millions of people understand their world. These seemingly routine editorial choices about which stories to pursue, which sources to quote, and which angles to emphasize, carry profound implications that extend far beyond the immediate news cycle. Yet most consumers of news remain unaware that these decisions increasingly reflect the interests of a small number of massive corporate conglomerates that have quietly consolidated control over American media. The transformation of American media from a diverse ecosystem of independent voices into a concentrated industry dominated by a handful of corporate giants represents one of the most significant yet underappreciated developments in modern democracy. This consolidation has fundamentally altered the relationship between information and power, creating a system where corporate interests can effectively control public discourse while maintaining the appearance of journalistic independence. The scope of media consolidation becomes clear when examining the ownership structures of major news outlets. 6 corporations now control roughly 90% of American media, a dramatic concentration from the dozens of independent companies that dominated the landscape just a few decades ago. This consolidation spans traditional media like television, radio, and newspapers, while extending into digital platforms that increasingly serve as primary news sources for younger generations. The consequences of this concentration become evident in the homogenization of news coverage across supposedly independent outlets. Stories that challenge corporate interests or threaten established power structures often receive minimal coverage or are framed in ways that minimize their significance. Meanwhile, narratives that serve corporate objectives receive extensive coverage and prominent placement, creating a media landscape that consistently reinforces certain worldviews while marginalizing others. Disney's media empire exemplifies how corporate conglomeration affects news coverage. The company owns ABC News, ESPN, numerous cable channels, and vast entertainment properties that generate billions in revenue from global markets. This diverse portfolio creates inherent conflicts of interest when ABC News covers issues affecting Disney's other business interests, from labor disputes at theme parks to international trade policies that might affect movie distribution. Similar conflicts pervade other media conglomerates. Comcast, which owns NBC Universal, also operates as a major internet service provider and cable company, creating obvious tensions when NBC reports on net neutrality, telecommunications regulation, or broadband policy. These conflicts rarely result in explicit censorship, but instead manifest through subtle editorial decisions that favor corporate perspectives while maintaining the appearance of balanced journalism. The influence of corporate ownership extends beyond direct business interests to encompass broader ideological perspectives that serve corporate America's interests. Media conglomerates consistently promote narratives that emphasize individual responsibility over systemic problems, market solutions over regulatory intervention, and consumer choice over collective action. These perspectives aren't necessarily wrong, but their consistent promotion across multiple platforms creates a media environment that systematically favors certain political and economic viewpoints. Advertising revenue structures create additional layers of corporate influence over editorial content. News organizations depend on advertising income for survival, creating powerful incentives to avoid coverage that might displease major advertisers. This influence operates through self-censorship, as editors and producers internalize advertiser preferences, avoiding stories that might threaten advertising relationships. The pharmaceutical industry represents a particularly clear example of advertiser influence over news content. Television news programs regularly feature segments on health and medical topics, while being supported by advertising from pharmaceutical companies promoting specific medications. These relationships create subtle but persistent bias toward medical interventions over preventive approaches, branded medications over generic alternatives, and individual health solutions over public health measures. Automotive manufacturers, financial institutions, and technology companies, similarly, receive favorable coverage from news outlets that depend on their advertising revenue. Investigative reporting on these industries has declined significantly as traditional news organizations become more dependent on corporate advertising and less willing to risk advertiser displeasure. The revolving door between media companies and other industries creates additional channels for corporate influence. Journalists and media executives regularly move between news organizations and corporate communications roles, bringing industry perspectives and personal relationships that influence coverage decisions. Former government officials also transition into media roles, often maintaining relationships and perspectives that favor establishment viewpoints. This circulation of personnel creates informal networks that shape news coverage through personal relationships and shared assumptions rather than explicit coordination. Journalists who maintain relationships with corporate sources depend on these connections for access and information, creating incentives to present corporate perspectives favorably to preserve these valuable relationships. Corporate public relations has evolved into a sophisticated industry that shapes news coverage through multiple strategies designed to advance client interests while maintaining the appearance of independent journalism. PR professionals, many of whom are former journalists, understand newsroom operations and exploit these insights to influence coverage. The practice of video news releases allows corporations to create news content that appears to originate from legitimate journalistic sources. These professionally produced segments are distributed to television stations and often aired without disclosure of their corporate sponsorship. Local news operations, facing budget constraints and staffing limitations, frequently use these materials as legitimate news content, essentially broadcasting corporate advertising disguised as journalism. Corporate communication strategies have adapted to digital media environments by creating content that mimics legitimate journalism while advancing specific corporate interests. Company blogs, social media accounts, and sponsored content often employ journalistic techniques and formats while promoting corporate perspectives on issues affecting their industries. The rise of native advertising has further blurred the lines between editorial content and corporate messaging. These sponsored articles, designed to match the style and appearance of legitimate journalism, appear alongside actual news stories and often receive similar prominence. While disclosure requirements theoretically distinguish native advertising from editorial content, these distinctions are often subtle and easily overlooked by consumers. International news coverage reveals another dimension of corporate influence over American media. News organizations increasingly rely on a small number of wire services and international news agencies for foreign coverage, creating opportunities for corporate and government interests to shape how global events are presented to American audiences. Corporate interests with international operations can influence coverage of foreign events through their relationships with news organizations and their ability to provide access to corporate executives and facilities in various countries. This influence often manifests in coverage that emphasizes stability and business-friendly policies over human rights concerns or environmental issues that might complicate corporate operations. The decline of international bureaus and foreign correspondents has made American news organizations more dependent on official sources and corporate communications for international news. This dependence creates opportunities for corporate interests to frame international events in ways that serve their business objectives while appearing to provide objective reporting. Technology platforms have introduced new forms of corporate control over information distribution. Social media companies, search engines, and digital news aggregators employ algorithms that determine which content millions of people encounter. Yet these algorithms are designed primarily to maximize engagement and advertising revenue rather than to serve public information needs. The algorithms that govern content distribution on major platforms systematically favor certain types of content over others, often prioritizing sensational or emotionally charged material that generates high engagement rates. This algorithmic bias shapes public discourse by amplifying some voices while suppressing others, creating a digital media environment that rewards polarization and conflict over nuanced analysis. Corporate interests exploit these algorithmic systems through sophisticated digital marketing campaigns that use multiple accounts, automated systems, and targeted advertising to amplify their preferred messages while creating the appearance of organic grassroots support. These campaigns can rapidly spread corporate messaging across digital platforms while obscuring their commercial origins. The data collection practices of digital platforms provide corporate interests with unprecedented insights into individual behavior and preferences, enabling precisely targeted influence campaigns. Companies can identify specific individuals who might be persuaded to support their positions and deliver customized messages designed to exploit particular psychological vulnerabilities or political perspectives. Media consolidation has eliminated many of the competitive pressures that once encouraged diverse perspectives and investigative reporting. When a small number of companies control most media outlets, they face limited pressure to differentiate their products through superior journalism or diverse viewpoints. Instead, they can focus on maximizing profits through cost reduction and audience retention strategies that prioritize entertainment value over informational content. The result is a media landscape characterized by increasingly homogeneous coverage that reflects the perspectives and interests of corporate owners rather than the diverse needs and interests of democratic citizens. Stories that challenge corporate power or threaten established interests receive minimal coverage, while narratives that serve corporate objectives are amplified across multiple platforms. This homogenization extends beyond news content to encompass the range of acceptable political and economic discourse. Media outlets consistently present debates within narrow parameters that exclude perspectives that might threaten corporate interests or challenge fundamental assumptions about economic systems and power structures. The concentration of media ownership has also reduced the resources available for investigative journalism and long-term reporting projects that might uncover corporate wrongdoing or systemic problems. Cost-cutting measures have eliminated many investigative reporting positions while reducing the time and resources available for complex stories that require extensive research and verification. Local news coverage has been particularly affected by media consolidation, as corporate owners reduce local staffing while centralizing production to reduce costs. This has created news deserts where communities lack adequate coverage of local government, business activities, and social issues, reducing democratic accountability at the local level where many important decisions are made. The impact of media consolidation extends beyond journalism to encompass entertainment programming that shapes cultural narratives and social values. The same corporate conglomerates that control news organizations also own major entertainment studios, allowing them to influence public consciousness through multiple channels simultaneously. Entertainment programming consistently promotes narratives that celebrate wealth accumulation, individual achievement, and consumer culture, while marginalizing alternative values or social arrangements. These cultural messages, while subtle, reinforce political and economic systems that serve corporate interests by shaping public expectations and aspirations. Understanding the architecture of media influence requires recognizing that corporate control over information operates through multiple interconnected systems, rather than simple censorship or propaganda. The result is a media environment that systematically favors certain perspectives while marginalizing others, creating the appearance of diverse viewpoints, while actually narrowing the range of acceptable discourse. Breaking free from this corporate control requires developing alternative media sources, supporting independent journalism, and creating new models of media ownership that prioritize public service over profit maximization. Most importantly, it requires citizens to become more sophisticated consumers of information who can recognize corporate influence and seek out diverse perspectives that challenge dominant narratives. Chapter 2: Manufacturing Consent, the Psychology of Mass Persuasion. The focus group sits in a windowless conference room, watching a carefully crafted news segment about healthcare policy while researchers observe their reactions through one-way glass. Every element of the presentation has been tested and refined through psychological research, The anchor's tone of voice, the selection of interview subjects, the order in which information is presented, and even the background music that plays during emotional moments. The participants believe they're providing feedback on journalistic content, but they're actually serving as test subjects in a sophisticated experiment designed to optimize the segment's persuasive impact. This scene, replicated in research facilities across the country, represents the convergence of mass media and behavioral psychology in service of manufacturing public consent for predetermined political and economic agendas. The techniques employed in these settings draw from decades of research into human cognition, emotion, and social behavior, creating a systematic approach to public persuasion that operates largely below the threshold of conscious awareness. The concept of manufacturing consent, popularized by scholars like Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, describes how media systems can shape public opinion to serve powerful interests while maintaining the appearance of independent journalism and democratic discourse. This process doesn't rely on crude propaganda or obvious manipulation, but instead employs subtle psychological techniques that influence how people perceive and interpret information. Modern media organizations employ teams of psychologists, market researchers, and data scientists who analyze audience behavior to optimize the persuasive impact of news content. These specialists understand how cognitive biases, emotional responses, and social pressures influence information processing, allowing them to craft messages that exploit these psychological vulnerabilities while appearing to provide objective information. The psychology of selective attention plays a crucial role in media manipulation. Research demonstrates that people naturally filter information based on existing beliefs and preferences, paying attention to information that confirms their preconceptions while ignoring or dismissing contradictory evidence. Media organizations exploit this tendency by presenting information in ways that trigger confirmation bias, allowing audiences to feel they're receiving objective information while actually reinforcing predetermined viewpoints. Framing effects represent another fundamental tool of psychological manipulation in media content. The same factual information can lead to dramatically different conclusions depending on how it's presented, with subtle changes in language, context, and emphasis altering audience perceptions without changing underlying facts. Media professionals understand these effects and employ them strategically to guide audience interpretations in desired directions. Consider how economic news is typically framed in mainstream media. Stock market increases are presented as universally positive developments, while labor strikes or wage increases are often framed as threats to economic stability. These framing choices reflect corporate interests rather than objective analysis, but they shape public understanding of economic issues by consistently presenting certain perspectives as natural and reasonable while marginalizing alternatives. The use of expert sources provides another avenue for psychological manipulation. Media outlets regularly feature analysts, commentators, and specialists who provide authoritative interpretations of current events, lending credibility to particular viewpoints while appearing to offer balanced analysis. However, the selection of these experts often reflects editorial biases, with corporate-friendly analysts receiving regular platforms while critical voices are marginalized or excluded entirely. The credentials and affiliations of these experts are rarely scrutinized by audiences, who tend to defer to apparent authority figures regardless of potential conflicts of interest. Media organizations exploit this deference to authority by featuring experts whose perspectives align with desired narratives while obscuring their connections to interested parties. Emotional manipulation represents perhaps the most powerful tool in the media persuasion arsenal. Research demonstrates that emotional responses significantly influence information processing and decision-making, often overriding rational analysis. Media content is carefully crafted to trigger specific emotional responses that support predetermined conclusions, using techniques borrowed from advertising and entertainment industries. Fear-based messaging proves particularly effective at shaping public opinion and behavior. News coverage consistently emphasizes threats, dangers, and potential catastrophes while minimizing positive developments or constructive solutions. This approach keeps audiences engaged while creating psychological states that make people more receptive to authoritarian solutions and less likely to question official narratives. The repetition of key phrases and concepts across multiple media outlets creates artificial consensus that influences public opinion through social proof mechanisms. When audiences encounter the same language and interpretations across supposedly independent news sources, they conclude that these perspectives represent mainstream consensus rather than coordinated messaging campaigns. This manufactured consensus is particularly effective because it exploits people's natural tendency to conform to perceived social norms. Individuals who might initially question particular narratives often suppress their doubts when they believe most other people accept these narratives as factual, creating a spiral of silence that reinforces dominant viewpoints while marginalizing dissent. The timing and sequencing of news coverage also serve psychological manipulation purposes. Important stories that might challenge powerful interests are often released during periods when public attention is focused elsewhere, while favorable stories receive prominent placement during high-attention periods. This manipulation of information timing allows media organizations to fulfill minimal disclosure requirements while minimizing the impact of potentially damaging revelations. Social media platforms have introduced new dimensions to psychological manipulation through algorithmic content curation and micro-targeting capabilities. These platforms collect vast amounts of data about individual users' behavior, preferences, and psychological profiles, allowing for precisely targeted persuasion campaigns that adapt to specific psychological vulnerabilities. The algorithmic curation of social media feeds creates personalized information environments that reinforce existing beliefs while filtering out challenging perspectives. Users receive content that confirms their preconceptions while remaining unaware of alternative viewpoints, creating the illusion of diverse information exposure while actually narrowing their intellectual horizons. Micro-targeting technologies allow manipulative content to be delivered to specific demographic groups or even individual users based on their psychological profiles and behavioral patterns. This capability enables sophisticated influence campaigns that present different messages to different audiences while maintaining plausible deniability about coordinated manipulation efforts. The use of astroturfing campaigns on social media platforms creates artificial grassroots movements that appear to represent authentic public opinion while actually advancing corporate or political interests. These campaigns employ multiple fake accounts, automated systems, and coordinated messaging to create the appearance of widespread support for particular positions while obscuring their artificial origins. Parasocial relationships between media personalities and audiences provide another channel for psychological manipulation. Viewers develop emotional connections with news anchors, commentators, and other media figures, creating trust relationships that can be exploited to influence political and economic attitudes. These relationships feel genuine to audiences, while actually serving commercial and political purposes. The careful cultivation of media personalities involves extensive market research and psychological testing to identify characteristics that generate trust and likability among target audiences. These personalities are then positioned as authoritative sources, whose perspectives carry weight beyond their actual expertise or credentials. Cognitive overload represents a crucial element in media manipulation strategies. By presenting vast amounts of information while limiting the time available for processing and analysis, media organizations can overwhelm audiences' critical thinking capabilities. This overload makes people more susceptible to authoritative interpretations and less likely to engage in independent analysis of complex issues. The pace and complexity of modern news cycles contribute to cognitive overload by constantly shifting focus between different stories and issues without allowing sufficient time for deep understanding or reflection. This creates a perpetual state of partial knowledge that makes audiences dependent on media interpretations rather than developing independent understanding. The integration of entertainment elements into news programming serves multiple psychological manipulation purposes. Entertainment content triggers emotional responses that can override rational analysis, while making audiences more receptive to embedded political messages. The blending of news and entertainment also normalizes the consumption of biased information by framing it as entertainment rather than journalism. Infotainment programming uses humor, celebrity content, and dramatic presentation techniques to make political messages more palatable while reducing critical scrutiny. Audiences consuming this content often lower their intellectual defenses because they're seeking entertainment rather than information, making them more susceptible to embedded persuasion attempts. The psychology of source credibility plays a crucial role in media manipulation. Information from sources perceived as credible receives less critical scrutiny than information from questionable sources, allowing manipulative content to bypass critical thinking when it appears to originate from trusted institutions. Media organizations exploit credibility perceptions through careful branding and positioning that emphasizes their journalistic credentials while obscuring their commercial interests and political biases. The appearance of institutional credibility allows biased content to influence audiences who would reject the same information if they understood its true origins and purposes. Subliminal and semi-subliminal messaging techniques, borrowed from advertising psychology, are regularly employed in news programming to influence audience attitudes without triggering conscious awareness. These techniques include strategic use of imagery, color, music, and visual composition to create emotional associations that support desired narratives. The cumulative effect of these psychological manipulation techniques is the creation of artificial consensus around political and economic positions that serve powerful interests while appearing to reflect genuine public opinion. This manufactured consent operates through multiple reinforcing mechanisms that make it difficult for individuals to recognize or resist manipulation attempts. Understanding the psychology of mass persuasion requires recognizing that modern media manipulation operates through sophisticated applications of behavioral research rather than crude propaganda techniques. The result is a media environment that systematically shapes public consciousness in ways that serve corporate and political interests, while maintaining the appearance of independent journalism and democratic discourse. Developing resistance to these manipulation techniques requires media literacy education that helps citizens recognize psychological manipulation strategies and develop critical thinking skills that can counter their effects. Most importantly, it requires creating alternative information sources that prioritize public education over commercial manipulation, allowing citizens to access information designed to inform rather than persuade. Chapter 3. The Gatekeepers, Editorial Control and the Filtering of Reality. The editorial meeting convenes at precisely 10 o'clock each morning, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the newsroom floor. Around the polished table sit the individuals who will determine what millions of Americans learn about their world that day: the managing editor, section editors, assignment editors, and senior producers. The discussion appears to focus on traditional journalistic values like newsworthiness, public interest, and available resources, but subtle undercurrents reveal the complex web of pressures that actually shape these decisions. The managing editor glances at her smartphone, checking the latest social media trends and overnight ratings. The business editor mentions a potential story about pharmaceutical pricing, but notes that the pharmaceutical industry represents a major advertising category. The political editor proposes investigating a congressional ethics scandal, but worries about losing access to key sources. The producer suggests a feel-good feature about a local business success story, knowing it will please both advertisers and corporate ownership. These conversations, repeated in newsrooms across the country, represent the daily exercise of editorial gatekeeping that determines which information reaches the public and how it's presented. The participants in these meetings rarely acknowledge the commercial and political pressures that influence their decisions, instead rationalizing their choices through professional journalism concepts that obscure the systematic filtering of information. Editorial gatekeeping operates through multiple layers of control, that shape information flow from initial story conception through final publication or broadcast. At each stage, various pressures and incentives filter information in ways that serve particular interests while maintaining the appearance of independent journalism. The initial story selection process reflects the perspectives and priorities of editorial staff, who are predominantly drawn from similar socioeconomic backgrounds and educational experiences. This homogeneity creates systematic blind spots that exclude stories important to marginalized communities, while overemphasizing issues that concern affluent professionals. Assignment editors, who determine which stories receive resources and attention, operate under pressure to produce content that will attract audiences and satisfy advertisers. These pressures naturally favor sensational, conflict-oriented, or celebrity-focused content over complex policy issues or systematic problems that might require extensive investigation. The source selection process represents another crucial gatekeeping function that shapes how stories are framed and understood. Journalists rely on regular sources who can provide quotable commentary on current events, but these sources are typically drawn from established institutions and organizations that represent mainstream perspectives. Corporate executives, government officials, and institutional leaders receive regular media access because they offer authoritative perspectives on issues within their domains. These sources often have clear interests in shaping coverage in particular directions, but their institutional credentials lend credibility to their viewpoints while obscuring their biases. Alternative voices, including activists, independent researchers, and community organizers, face systematic barriers to media access despite often possessing valuable insights and information. These barriers include requirements for institutional affiliation, professional credentials, and established relationships with media personnel that effectively exclude grassroots perspectives from mainstream coverage. The reliance on official sources creates a systematic bias toward establishment perspectives, while marginalizing critical voices that might challenge existing power structures. This bias operates through seemingly neutral professional practices that appear to prioritize credibility and authority, while actually serving particular political and economic interests. Fact-checking and verification processes, while important for accuracy, also serve gatekeeping functions by determining which claims receive scrutiny and which are accepted without investigation. Statements from official sources often receive less rigorous fact-checking than claims from alternative sources, creating double standards that privilege establishment perspectives. The resources required for extensive fact-checking and investigation are typically allocated to stories that serve editorial priorities, rather than those that might challenge powerful interests. This resource allocation reflects the commercial pressures facing news organizations, which must balance investigative costs against potential advertising and access consequences. Editorial control extends beyond story selection to encompass the framing and presentation of information that shapes audience understanding. The same factual information can support dramatically different conclusions depending on how it's contextualized, with editorial decisions about emphasis, context, and interpretation guiding audience perceptions. Headlines, lead paragraphs, and visual presentations receive careful attention from editors who understand their disproportionate impact on audience comprehension. These elements often reflect editorial biases more clearly than story content, revealing the perspectives that editors want audiences to adopt. The placement and prominence given to different stories signals their relative importance to audiences, with front-page placement or lead broadcast position conferring significance while back-page or brief mention minimizes impact. These placement decisions reflect editorial priorities that often serve commercial rather than public interest. Corporate ownership creates overarching editorial pressures that influence coverage of issues affecting parent companies or their business partners. While these pressures rarely manifest as explicit censorship, they operate through self-censorship, as editors internalize corporate interests and avoid stories that might create problems for their employers. Advertising considerations represent another layer of editorial pressure that affects story selection and presentation. Editors understand which industries and companies provide significant advertising revenue and adjust coverage accordingly, avoiding critical coverage that might threaten these revenue streams. The entertainment industry receives notably favorable coverage from media outlets that depend on entertainment advertising and promotional relationships. Technology companies, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and financial institutions similarly benefit from coverage that emphasizes their positive contributions while minimizing criticism or investigation. Editorial control also operates through the suppression or marginalization of stories that might challenge fundamental assumptions about economic and political systems. Stories that question the benefits of free trade, the effectiveness of market solutions, or the legitimacy of existing power structures receive minimal coverage or dismissive treatment. This systematic filtering creates a media environment where certain perspectives and information are consistently excluded from public discourse, limiting the range of acceptable debate and maintaining artificial consensus around controversial issues. The hiring and promotion practices within news organizations contribute to editorial control by selecting journalists who share particular perspectives and professional values. Media organizations tend to hire journalists with similar educational backgrounds, professional experiences, and social connections, creating homogeneous newsroom cultures that exclude diverse viewpoints. Career advancement within news organizations often depends on maintaining relationships with sources and superiors who represent establishment interests. Journalists who challenge these interests or pursue controversial stories may find their career prospects limited, creating incentives for self-censorship and conformity. The beat system, which assigns journalists to cover specific topics or institutions, creates relationships between reporters and their subjects that can compromise editorial independence. Beat reporters depend on access to sources for their professional success, creating incentives to maintain favorable relationships rather than pursue aggressive investigation. Government and corporate beat reporters often develop close relationships with their sources that blur the lines between journalism and public relations. These relationships provide access to information, but also create obligations that can compromise critical coverage. Editorial control extends to the treatment of whistleblowers and sources who provide information that challenges powerful interests. News organizations often treat such sources with skepticism while giving credence to official denials, creating systematic bias against revelations of wrongdoing. The legal departments of news organizations increasingly influence editorial decisions by advising against stories that might create legal liability or expensive litigation. This legal risk assessment often favors powerful interests who can afford to threaten expensive lawsuits against news organizations with limited resources. The speed of modern news cycles creates additional pressures that favor official sources and conventional wisdom over independent investigation and analysis. The pressure to publish quickly often prevents thorough verification and context development, leading to coverage that reflects official narratives rather than comprehensive understanding. Social media and digital platforms have introduced new forms of editorial control through algorithmic content curation and engagement-based distribution systems. These systems prioritize content that generates high engagement rates, often favoring sensational or polarizing material over substantive analysis. The metrics used to measure success in digital media environments emphasize audience engagement and advertising revenue over public service or journalistic quality. These metrics create incentives for editors to select and present content that maximizes clicks and shares rather than informing public discourse. International news coverage reveals particularly clear examples of editorial gatekeeping, with American media outlets consistently presenting foreign events through frameworks that support American foreign policy objectives, while marginalizing perspectives that might challenge these policies. Coverage of international conflicts, trade disputes, and diplomatic issues typically reflects official government positions, while excluding alternative analyses that might complicate public support for particular policies. This systematic bias in international coverage shapes public understanding of global issues in ways that serve particular political interests. Understanding editorial gatekeeping requires recognizing that it operates through seemingly neutral professional practices that actually serve particular interests while maintaining the appearance of independent journalism. The cumulative effect of these practices is the systematic filtering of information that reaches the public, creating artificial consensus around controversial issues while excluding perspectives that challenge existing power structures. Breaking free from editorial gatekeeping requires supporting independent media sources that operate outside commercial pressures, and developing media literacy skills that help citizens recognize bias and seek diverse perspectives. Most importantly, it requires creating new models of journalism that prioritize public service over commercial success and democratic discourse over manufactured consent. Chapter 4: Digital Deception: How Algorithms and Data Mining Control Information Flow. Sarah scrolls through her Facebook feed during her morning coffee, encountering a carefully curated selection of news articles, opinion pieces, and social media posts that seem to perfectly match her interests and worldview. She sees stories about environmental protection efforts, progressive political candidates, and criticism of corporate power that align with her personal values. Meanwhile, her neighbor Tom, drinking coffee at the same time just a few houses away, sees an entirely different selection of content emphasizing traditional family values, economic growth, and national security concerns that reinforce his conservative perspectives. Neither Sarah nor Tom realizes that their personalized information environments have been constructed by sophisticated algorithms that analyze their digital behavior to determine what content will keep them engaged, clicking, and scrolling. These algorithms don't prioritize truth, accuracy, or democratic discourse. They optimize for attention and advertising revenue, creating personalized echo chambers that reinforce existing beliefs while filtering out challenging information. This digital manipulation represents a fundamental shift in how information reaches the public, moving from mass media broadcasting the same content to diverse audiences toward personalized content delivery that creates millions of individualized information environments. This transformation has profound implications for democratic discourse, social cohesion, and citizens' ability to make informed decisions about complex public issues. The algorithms that govern content distribution on major digital platforms operate as invisible gatekeepers that determine which information billions of people encounter daily. These algorithms analyze vast amounts of user data to predict what content will generate engagement, using machine learning techniques that continuously refine their targeting capabilities based on user responses. The data collection underlying these algorithmic systems extends far beyond users' explicit interactions with platform content. Digital platforms track users across the internet through cookies, tracking pixels, and device fingerprinting, building comprehensive profiles that include browsing history, purchase behavior, location data, and even offline activities through data brokers and third-party partnerships. This comprehensive surveillance enables platforms to understand users' psychological profiles, political preferences, emotional states, and behavioral patterns with unprecedented precision. The resulting data profiles allow for micro-targeting of content and advertising that can influence attitudes and behavior in ways that users rarely recognize or understand. The engagement-driven nature of algorithmic content curation creates systematic biases that favor sensational, emotionally charged, or polarizing content over nuanced analysis or constructive discourse. Content that generates strong emotional responses receives wider distribution, while measured or balanced content often receives limited visibility. This algorithmic bias toward engagement has contributed to the polarization of public discourse by amplifying extreme viewpoints while marginalizing moderate perspectives. Users consuming algorithmically curated content are exposed to increasingly radical positions as platforms optimize for engagement rather than accuracy or social value. The feedback loops created by algorithmic systems can rapidly radicalize users by gradually exposing them to more extreme content based on their engagement patterns. Users who click on conspiracy theories or political content may find their feeds flooded with similar material, creating information environments that reinforce and amplify particular worldviews. Corporate interests exploit these algorithmic systems through sophisticated digital marketing campaigns that use multiple accounts, automated systems, and coordinated messaging to game engagement algorithms. These campaigns can artificially amplify corporate messaging while creating the appearance of organic grassroots support for particular positions. The use of bot networks and fake accounts to manipulate algorithmic systems has become a standard practice for corporations, political organizations, and foreign governments seeking to influence public opinion. These artificial engagement campaigns can rapidly spread misleading information while overwhelming authentic voices and perspectives. Social media platforms' business models depend on keeping users engaged and active, creating incentives to prioritize addictive content over informative content. The platforms profit from user attention, regardless of whether that attention serves constructive purposes or undermines democratic discourse and social cohesion. The addictive design of social media platforms employs psychological techniques borrowed from gambling and gaming industries to maximize user engagement. Features like infinite scroll, variable reward schedules, and social validation mechanisms are designed to create compulsive usage patterns that prioritize platform engagement over user well-being. These design choices have particular implications for information consumption, as users consuming content in addictive scrolling sessions are less likely to engage in critical thinking or fact-checking. The rapid pace of content consumption encouraged by platform design reduces the time available for reflection and analysis, making users more susceptible to misinformation and manipulation. The personalization of content delivery creates filter bubbles that isolate users from diverse perspectives and information that might challenge their existing beliefs. While this personalization can enhance user experience by providing relevant content, it also creates information environments that reinforce bias and limit intellectual growth. The algorithmic filtering of information can create artificial consensus by exposing users primarily to viewpoints that align with their existing beliefs while hiding dissenting perspectives. This creates the illusion of widespread agreement with particular positions, while actually reflecting algorithmic manipulation rather than genuine public opinion. Search engines employ similar algorithmic manipulation to control information access, with search results influenced by commercial interests, political considerations, and user profiling. The ranking of search results can significantly influence public understanding of issues by determining which information sources users encounter first. Google's search algorithm, while presented as an objective ranking system, incorporates numerous factors that can bias results toward particular perspectives or commercial interests. The company's business model depends on advertising revenue, creating incentives to prioritize results that serve advertiser interests over user information needs. The personalization of search results means that different users searching for the same terms may receive different information, creating individualized information environments that can lead to different conclusions about factual questions. This personalization undermines the shared factual foundation necessary for democratic discourse. The rise of voice assistants and AI-powered information systems introduces new forms of algorithmic control over information access. These systems provide users with single answers to complex questions, eliminating the ability to compare multiple sources or evaluate different perspectives. The selection of information sources and the framing of responses by AI systems can significantly influence user understanding of issues while appearing to provide objective information. The opaque nature of these systems makes it difficult for users to understand how answers are generated or what biases might be embedded in the algorithms. Digital advertising systems use detailed user profiling to deliver targeted political and commercial messages that exploit individual psychological vulnerabilities. These micro-targeting capabilities allow manipulative campaigns to present different messages to different users while maintaining plausible deniability about coordinated manipulation efforts. The data collection and profiling systems that enable micro-targeting operate largely outside public oversight, with users having limited understanding of how their personal information is collected, analyzed, and used to influence their behavior. The complexity of these systems makes it difficult for users to make informed decisions about their privacy and digital consumption. Platform recommendation systems used by YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and other major platforms actively shape user behavior by suggesting content designed to maximize engagement. These recommendations can lead users down rabbit holes of increasingly extreme content as algorithms optimize for continued engagement rather than user well-being or factual accuracy. The recommendations generated by these systems can significantly influence political attitudes, consumer behavior, and social relationships by exposing users to content they might not have actively sought. The algorithmic nature of these recommendations obscures their manipulative potential while presenting them as helpful suggestions. The integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning into content creation enables the generation of sophisticated misinformation that can be difficult to distinguish from legitimate content. Deepfake technology, automated writing systems, and AI-generated imagery can create convincing false content at scale. These AI-generated content systems can be used to create artificial grassroots movements, generate fake news stories, and produce misleading political content that appears authentic. The scale and sophistication of AI-generated misinformation pose significant challenges to fact-checking and content moderation systems. The global nature of digital platforms creates challenges for democratic governance and oversight, as these systems operate across national boundaries while being subject to minimal regulation in most jurisdictions. The concentration of algorithmic power in a few multinational corporations creates unprecedented control over global information flow. The lack of transparency in algorithmic systems makes it difficult for researchers, policymakers, and citizens to understand how these systems operate or what effects they have on public discourse and democratic processes. The proprietary nature of these algorithms prevents independent evaluation of their social impacts. Understanding digital deception requires recognizing that algorithmic systems are not neutral technologies, but tools designed to influence human behavior in service of commercial and political objectives. The personalization and optimization of information delivery creates unprecedented opportunities for manipulation, while making such manipulation difficult to detect or resist. The cumulative effect of algorithmic information control is the fragmentation of public discourse into personalized information environments that can be manipulated by sophisticated actors while appearing to provide users with objective information tailored to their interests. This fragmentation undermines the shared factual foundation necessary for democratic governance, while creating new opportunities for propaganda and manipulation. Breaking free from digital deception requires developing digital literacy skills that help users understand how algorithmic systems operate and how to seek diverse information sources. It also requires regulatory frameworks that ensure transparency in algorithmic systems and protect users from manipulative targeting. Most importantly, it requires creating alternative information systems that prioritize public service over commercial manipulation and democratic discourse over engagement optimization.
Chapter 1: The Invisible Crisis. Human trafficking represents one of the most severe violations of human dignity occurring in the contemporary world. Yet it remains largely hidden from public view due to its clandestine nature, the vulnerability of its victims, and the sophisticated methods used by traffickers to avoid detection. Understanding the scope and complexity of modern trafficking requires examining how economic desperation, social inequality, and legal vulnerabilities create conditions that enable traffickers to exploit millions of people while generating enormous profits for criminal networks and corrupt officials. The definitional complexities surrounding human trafficking often obscure public understanding of this crime, as the legal frameworks and popular perceptions of trafficking may not align with the diverse realities experienced by victims. International law defines trafficking as involving the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploitation, but this definition encompasses a wide range of situations that may not match common stereotypes about trafficking victims or perpetrators. The focus on movement and transportation in many trafficking definitions can obscure cases where victims are exploited in their home communities, while the emphasis on force and coercion may not capture situations where victims are manipulated through false promises or economic desperation. The statistical challenges in measuring human trafficking reflect both the hidden nature of the crime and the methodological difficulties in studying illegal activities that participants have strong incentives to conceal. Estimates of trafficking victims range from millions to tens of millions globally, but these numbers are based on limited data and methodological assumptions that may not capture the full scope of the problem. The lack of reliable data makes it difficult to assess the effectiveness of anti-trafficking efforts, while also potentially leading to policy responses that are based more on perception than empirical evidence. The economic foundations of modern trafficking are rooted in global inequalities that create both supply and demand for exploitable labor across different sectors of legitimate and illegitimate economies. Poverty, unemployment, and limited educational opportunities in some regions create populations of vulnerable individuals who may be susceptible to trafficking, while economic demand for cheap labor, commercial sex, and other services in wealthier regions creates markets that traffickers can exploit. The globalization of economic activity has created new opportunities for traffickers to move people and profits across borders, while taking advantage of regulatory gaps and enforcement limitations. The technological dimensions of contemporary trafficking include the use of digital platforms for recruitment, coordination, and marketing that have transformed how traffickers operate, while also creating new vulnerabilities and opportunities for both exploitation and detection. Social media, online advertising, and digital payment systems have enabled traffickers to reach potential victims more efficiently, while also conducting business in ways that may be less visible to traditional law enforcement methods. The use of technology in trafficking also raises questions about the responsibility of platform companies and technology providers in preventing their services from being used for illegal purposes. The intersections between trafficking and other forms of crime and exploitation reveal how trafficking networks often operate within broader criminal ecosystems that may include drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, document fraud, and corruption. These interconnections mean that anti-trafficking efforts may need to address broader patterns of criminal activity and institutional corruption rather than focusing solely on trafficking-specific interventions. The overlap between trafficking and other forms of exploitation also raises questions about how to prioritize limited law enforcement and social service resources across different but related problems. The victim identification challenges that affect anti-trafficking efforts reflect the complexity of trafficking situations and the difficulties that service providers and law enforcement face in distinguishing between trafficking victims and other vulnerable populations. Victims may not self-identify as trafficked due to fear, shame, trauma, or lack of understanding about their situation, while service providers may lack the training or resources needed to recognize trafficking indicators. The criminalization of activities that trafficking victims may be forced to engage in, such as prostitution or immigration violations, can create additional barriers to victim identification and assistance. The trauma and psychological impacts of trafficking experiences create complex needs that extend far beyond immediate safety and legal status concerns, requiring specialized services and long-term support that may not be available through existing social service systems. Trafficking victims may experience post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems that affect their ability to participate in legal proceedings or reintegrate into their communities. The cultural and linguistic barriers that many trafficking victims face can complicate service delivery, while also affecting their ability to access legal protections and social services. The legal and policy frameworks that govern anti-trafficking efforts operate across multiple jurisdictions and legal systems that may have different definitions, priorities, and enforcement capabilities, creating coordination challenges and potential gaps in protection and prosecution. International anti-trafficking protocols provide broad frameworks for cooperation, but their implementation varies significantly across different countries and regions. The complexity of trafficking cases that may involve multiple jurisdictions can create challenges for prosecution while also affecting victim protection and assistance. The prevention challenges in anti-trafficking work require addressing the root causes and structural factors that create vulnerability to trafficking, but these prevention efforts often compete with more immediate law enforcement and victim service priorities for limited resources and political attention. Prevention may require long-term investments in economic development, education, and social service systems that extend far beyond traditional anti-trafficking programs. The evidence base for trafficking prevention strategies is often limited, making it difficult to design and implement effective prevention programs. The measurement and evaluation difficulties in anti-trafficking work reflect both the hidden nature of trafficking and the complexity of defining and measuring success in addressing this problem. Traditional law enforcement metrics like arrests and prosecutions may not capture the full impact of anti-trafficking efforts, while victim service metrics may not reflect the long-term outcomes of assistance programs. The lack of standardized definitions and measurement approaches across different organizations and jurisdictions makes it difficult to assess progress and coordinate efforts effectively. The public awareness and education challenges in anti-trafficking work involve communicating complex information about a hidden crime while avoiding oversimplification or sensationalism that may distort public understanding or policy responses. Media coverage of trafficking often focuses on dramatic cases that may not represent typical trafficking situations, while public education campaigns may rely on stereotypes that do not reflect the diversity of trafficking experiences. The challenge of raising awareness about trafficking without creating panic or stigmatizing vulnerable populations requires careful attention to messaging and communication strategies. The resource allocation and funding challenges in anti-trafficking work reflect competing priorities and limited resources that must be distributed across prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership activities. The funding available for anti-trafficking efforts often comes with restrictions and requirements that may not align with local needs and priorities, while the short-term nature of much grant funding can limit the development of sustainable anti-trafficking programs. The coordination between different funding sources and organizations can be challenging when different funders have different priorities and reporting requirements. Chapter 2: The Economics of Exploitation. The financial dimensions of human trafficking reveal how this criminal enterprise operates as a sophisticated business model that generates enormous profits through the systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations while minimizing costs and risks through strategic use of corruption, violence, and legal loopholes. Understanding the economic logic that drives trafficking requires examining how traffickers calculate profits and risks, how they structure their operations to maximize returns, and how legitimate economic systems inadvertently support and enable trafficking activities. The profit margins in human trafficking can be extraordinary compared to other criminal enterprises because human beings can be exploited repeatedly over extended periods, unlike drugs or other commodities that are consumed once. A single trafficking victim may generate tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue over their period of exploitation, while the initial investment in recruitment and transportation may be relatively modest. This economic reality creates powerful incentives for criminal organizations to enter and expand trafficking operations, while also explaining why trafficking has become one of the most profitable forms of organized crime globally. The supply chain economics of trafficking operations involve complex networks of recruiters, transporters, document providers, safehouse operators, and other service providers who each capture a portion of the profits generated through victim exploitation. These trafficking networks often operate with division of labor and specialization that allows them to achieve economies of scale, while also limiting the exposure of any single participant to law enforcement risks. The modular structure of many trafficking operations allows them to adapt quickly to enforcement pressure, while also making it difficult for law enforcement to disrupt entire networks through arrests of individual participants. The market dynamics that drive demand for trafficked persons operate across multiple economic sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, construction, hospitality, domestic work, and commercial sex industries, where the availability of extremely cheap or free labor provides competitive advantages to employers who are willing to engage in illegal practices. The demand for trafficked labor is often driven by economic pressures to reduce costs, increase profits, or maintain competitiveness in markets where legitimate businesses face pressure from those using exploited workers. Consumer demand for cheap goods and services can create market pressures that indirectly support trafficking by rewarding businesses that minimize labor costs through illegal means. The financial infrastructure that supports trafficking operations relies on both formal banking systems and informal money transfer networks that allow traffickers to move and launder proceeds while avoiding detection by financial regulators and law enforcement agencies. Traffickers may use legitimate businesses as fronts for money laundering, while also utilizing cash-based transactions, cryptocurrency, and other methods that provide anonymity and reduce traceability. The integration of trafficking proceeds into legitimate financial systems can make it difficult to distinguish between legal and illegal economic activity, while also providing traffickers with access to investment opportunities and financial services. The corruption costs and protection payments that trafficking networks must make to operate successfully represent significant business expenses that affect their operational strategies and profit calculations. Payments to corrupt officials, law enforcement, and other gatekeepers may represent substantial portions of trafficking profits, but these investments in corruption can provide protection from prosecution and access to official documents and services that facilitate trafficking operations. The cost of corruption may also affect trafficking routes and methods, as traffickers may choose more expensive but safer operational approaches that minimize their exposure to enforcement risks. The risk management strategies that trafficking organizations employ include diversification across different types of exploitation, geographic regions, and operational methods that spread risks while also creating multiple revenue streams. Trafficking networks may engage in multiple forms of exploitation simultaneously, while also maintaining legitimate business activities that provide cover for their illegal operations. The ability to quickly adapt operations in response to enforcement pressure requires maintaining flexible organizational structures and multiple contingency plans that allow continued operations even when specific routes or methods are disrupted. The pricing and revenue optimization strategies used in trafficking operations involve sophisticated understanding of market conditions, customer preferences, and competitive dynamics that allow traffickers to maximize profits from victim exploitation. In commercial sex trafficking, for example, traffickers may use dynamic pricing strategies that adjust rates based on location, time, and customer characteristics, while also employing marketing techniques that increase demand and customer retention. The commodification of human beings through trafficking involves treating victims as business assets whose value must be maximized through strategic exploitation and marketing. The cost structure analysis of trafficking operations reveals how traffickers minimize expenses while maximizing revenues through strategies that include using violence and coercion to reduce labor costs, avoiding taxation and regulation through illegal operations, and externalizing costs, such as victim healthcare and social services, onto society. The low overhead costs of many trafficking operations allow them to operate profitably even with relatively modest revenue streams, while the absence of legitimate worker protections and benefits further reduces operational expenses. The investment and expansion strategies used by successful trafficking organizations involve reinvesting profits into expanded operations, new routes and markets, improved operational security, and corruption networks that enable growth and diversification. Trafficking organizations may also invest in legitimate businesses that provide cover for their operations while also generating additional revenue streams. The reinvestment of trafficking profits into expanded operations can create exponential growth in the scale and scope of trafficking activities. The competitive dynamics within trafficking markets involve both cooperation and conflict between different criminal organizations that may share routes and resources while also competing for victims, customers, and territory. The barriers to entry in trafficking markets may be relatively low for small-scale operations, but establishing large-scale profitable networks requires significant investments in corruption, operational infrastructure, and market development. The competitive advantages in trafficking often relate to access to vulnerable populations, established corruption networks, and operational expertise rather than technological or capital advantages. The economic impacts of trafficking on legitimate economies include both the direct costs of law enforcement and victim services, and the broader economic distortions created by unfair competition from businesses using exploited labor. Companies that exploit trafficked workers can undercut legitimate businesses that pay fair wages and follow labor laws, creating market pressures that may encourage other employers to engage in similar practices. The presence of trafficking in particular economic sectors can depress wages and working conditions for all workers, while also undermining efforts to improve labor standards and worker protections. The financial investigation and asset forfeiture challenges in trafficking cases reflect the sophisticated methods that traffickers use to hide and protect their proceeds, while also highlighting the importance of targeting the financial dimensions of trafficking operations. Following the money trail in trafficking cases can be complex when traffickers use multiple jurisdictions, front businesses, and informal financial networks to move and hide their profits. The seizure and forfeiture of trafficking proceeds can provide both deterrent effects and resources for victim compensation and anti-trafficking programs, but these efforts require specialized expertise and international cooperation. The economic prevention strategies that could reduce trafficking vulnerability include addressing the poverty, unemployment, and economic inequality that create conditions where people may be susceptible to trafficking recruitment and exploitation. Economic development programs, job creation initiatives, and social safety nets may help reduce trafficking vulnerability, but these prevention approaches require long-term investments and may not produce immediate results. The challenge is developing economic prevention strategies that address root causes while also responding to immediate trafficking threats and victim needs. Chapter 3: The Methods of Control. The control mechanisms that traffickers use to maintain power over their victims involve sophisticated combinations of physical violence, psychological manipulation, economic coercion, and social isolation that create conditions where victims may be unable or unwilling to escape even when opportunities arise. Understanding these control methods reveals how trafficking operates not simply through physical restraint, but through complex systems of domination that exploit victims' vulnerabilities while creating psychological and practical barriers to freedom. The recruitment strategies that traffickers employ often begin with false promises of legitimate employment, education, or relationship opportunities that appeal to victims' hopes and aspirations rather than immediately revealing the exploitative nature of the trafficker's intentions. Recruiters may pose as legitimate employment agents, romantic partners, or benefactors who offer opportunities that seem too good to refuse, particularly for individuals facing economic hardship or limited opportunities in their current circumstances. The initial recruitment phase often involves building trust and creating emotional bonds that make victims more vulnerable to subsequent manipulation and control. The transportation and movement methods used by traffickers serve both practical and psychological control functions, as the process of moving victims away from familiar environments and support networks increases their dependence on traffickers while reducing their knowledge of escape routes and available resources. The transportation process may involve crossing international borders, using fraudulent documents, traveling through remote or dangerous routes that increase victim dependence on traffickers, or using legitimate transportation methods that appear normal to outside observers while maintaining control through threats and psychological manipulation. The debt bondage systems that many traffickers use create financial obligations that victims are told they must repay through their labor or services, even though these debts are often artificially inflated, include excessive interest rates, or involve charges for basic necessities that should be provided by employers. The debt structure creates a seemingly legitimate justification for continued exploitation, while also providing psychological justification for victims who may feel obligated to honor their financial commitments even under exploitative conditions. The manipulation of debt calculations allows traffickers to extend exploitation indefinitely while maintaining the appearance of a legitimate business relationship. The identity document confiscation that occurs in many trafficking situations removes victims' ability to prove their legal status, travel independently, or access services that require official identification. Traffickers may confiscate passports, identification cards, or other documents under the pretext of safekeeping or administrative necessity, but this practice effectively prevents victims from leaving or seeking assistance from authorities. The lack of identity documents can also make victims vulnerable to arrest and deportation if they are discovered by law enforcement, creating additional barriers to seeking help. The social isolation techniques used by traffickers include restricting victims' contact with family, friends, and community members, while also limiting their access to information about their surroundings, legal rights, and available resources. Victims may be prevented from learning local languages, accessing telecommunications, or developing relationships with people outside the trafficking operation. This isolation makes victims dependent on traffickers for information and social contact, while also reducing the likelihood that victims will learn about escape opportunities or assistance resources. The psychological manipulation strategies employed by traffickers often involve alternating between kindness and cruelty in ways that create trauma bonds and learned helplessness, while also using shame, guilt, and fear to maintain psychological control over victims. Traffickers may use techniques borrowed from abusive relationship dynamics, cult control methods, and military interrogation practices to break down victims' resistance and self-confidence. The psychological impact of these manipulation techniques can persist long after physical escape, affecting victims' ability to seek help and reintegrate into society. The violence and intimidation tactics used by traffickers range from direct physical abuse to threats against victims' family members that create climate of fear that discourages resistance or escape attempts. The violence may be unpredictable and disproportionate to create maximum psychological impact, while threats against family members exploit victims' care for others to ensure compliance. The use of violence against some victims can also serve to intimidate others within trafficking operations, creating environments where actual violence may be less necessary because the threat is credible and immediate. The drug and substance dependency that traffickers may deliberately create or exploit provides additional control mechanisms, while also serving as coping mechanisms for victims dealing with trauma and exploitation. Traffickers may provide drugs or alcohol to victims as rewards for compliance or as means of reducing resistance and escape motivation. The development of substance dependencies can create additional barriers to escape, while also affecting victims' credibility with law enforcement and service providers, who may view addiction as criminal behavior rather than a consequence of exploitation. The surveillance and monitoring systems that traffickers use to track victim movements and activities may include both low-tech methods, like constant supervision, and high-tech approaches using GPS tracking, social media monitoring, and other surveillance technologies. The knowledge that they are being watched can create psychological pressure on victims even when direct supervision is not present, while actual surveillance systems allow traffickers to quickly detect and respond to escape attempts or other resistance behaviors. The exploitation of family relationships and cultural obligations allows traffickers to leverage victims' sense of responsibility for family members' welfare to maintain control over their behavior. Traffickers may threaten harm to family members, create financial dependencies where families rely on money sent by trafficking victims, or exploit cultural values about family honor and obligation to discourage resistance. These family-based control mechanisms can be particularly effective because they appeal to victims' genuine care for others rather than relying solely on self-preservation instincts. The normalization and rationalization techniques used by traffickers involve creating explanations and justifications for exploitation that may help victims cope with their situations while also reducing their motivation to seek escape or assistance. Traffickers may frame exploitation as temporary hardship necessary for future benefits, as normal working conditions in particular industries, or as victims' own responsibility due to their circumstances or decisions. This psychological manipulation can create confusion about whether victims are actually being exploited, while also providing mental frameworks that make extreme situations seem tolerable. The institutional control mechanisms that operate through corrupt relationships with law enforcement, government officials, and service providers can make victims afraid to seek help from authorities who might ordinarily be expected to provide protection and assistance. When victims believe that police, immigration officials, or social service providers are working with traffickers or are hostile to victims, they may view these institutions as threats rather than sources of help. The corruption of institutional protections forces victims to rely entirely on their own resources, while also validating traffickers' claims that resistance is futile. The economic control strategies used by traffickers include controlling all victim income and expenses, while creating financial dependencies that make escape seem economically impossible. Victims may have no access to money, may be charged for basic necessities like food and shelter, or may be told that they owe substantial debts that must be repaid before they can leave. These economic control mechanisms create practical barriers to escape, while also providing psychological justifications for continued exploitation that may persist even after escape opportunities arise. Chapter 4: The Institutional Response. The governmental and organizational responses to human trafficking involve complex networks of law enforcement agencies, social service providers, and international organizations that often struggle to coordinate their efforts effectively, while also facing resource constraints, jurisdictional limitations, and competing priorities that can limit their effectiveness in addressing trafficking crimes and protecting victims. Understanding how institutions respond to trafficking reveals both the capabilities and limitations of existing systems, while highlighting opportunities for improvement and reform. The law enforcement approaches to trafficking investigations and prosecutions face significant challenges related to the hidden nature of trafficking crimes, the reluctance of victims to cooperate with authorities, and the complexity of building cases against sophisticated criminal organizations that may operate across multiple jurisdictions. Police agencies may lack specialized training in trafficking identification and investigation techniques, while prosecutors may struggle with cases that require extensive international cooperation and coordination with victim service providers. The success rates for trafficking prosecutions are often low compared to other types of crimes, reflecting both the difficulty of these cases and potential gaps in law enforcement capabilities. The victim identification and protection systems that are supposed to provide assistance to trafficking victims often struggle with limited resources, inadequate training, and complex bureaucratic procedures that may create barriers rather than providing effective support. Social service providers may lack specialized knowledge about trafficking victim needs, while immigration and law enforcement officials may not be trained to recognize trafficking indicators or may view victims as criminals rather than crime victims. The coordination between different agencies and service providers can be challenging when organizations have different mandates, funding sources, and operational priorities. The international cooperation mechanisms that are essential for addressing trafficking crimes that cross national borders face numerous obstacles, including differences in legal systems, political priorities, and enforcement capabilities that can create gaps in prosecution and victim protection efforts. Treaties and agreements that establish frameworks for cooperation may not be effectively implemented due to resource constraints, political obstacles, or practical challenges in coordinating across different legal and administrative systems. The extradition of trafficking suspects and the repatriation of trafficking victims can be complex processes that require extensive diplomatic and legal coordination. The prevention programming that aims to reduce trafficking vulnerability often focuses on awareness campaigns and education initiatives that may have limited effectiveness if they are not based on solid understanding of how trafficking actually occurs and what factors actually increase or decrease vulnerability. Prevention programs may use strategies that are intuitively appealing but not empirically validated, while the long-term nature of effective prevention makes it difficult to measure program impacts and adjust strategies based on results. The coordination between prevention efforts and other anti-trafficking activities can be challenging when different organizations have different theories about what causes trafficking and how it can be prevented. The funding and resource allocation systems that support anti-trafficking efforts often create perverse incentives and coordination challenges that may limit overall effectiveness, while also creating competition between organizations that should be collaborating. Funding may be available for high-profile enforcement activities, but not for long-term victim services, or may support international programs while neglecting domestic trafficking issues. The short-term nature of much grant funding can prevent organizations from developing sustainable programs, while also requiring excessive time and resources for proposal writing and reporting rather than direct service delivery. The performance measurement and evaluation challenges in anti-trafficking work reflect the difficulty of defining success in addressing a hidden crime, while also measuring outcomes that may not be apparent for months or years after interventions occur. Traditional law enforcement metrics like arrests and prosecutions may not capture the full impact of anti-trafficking efforts, while victim service metrics may not reflect the long-term effectiveness of assistance programs. The lack of standardized definitions and measurement approaches makes it difficult to compare programs and identify best practices across different organizations and jurisdictions. The training and capacity building efforts that aim to improve institutional responses to trafficking often struggle with high staff turnover, limited resources, and competing training priorities that prevent the development of sustained expertise within organizations. Training programs may focus on basic awareness rather than developing advanced skills, while the specialized nature of trafficking work requires ongoing professional development that may not be available or prioritized within organizations. The retention of trained staff can be challenging when organizations cannot offer competitive compensation or career advancement opportunities. The interagency coordination mechanisms that are supposed to facilitate collaboration between different organizations often struggle with turf battles, information sharing restrictions, and differences in organizational culture and priorities that can impede effective cooperation. Formal coordination structures like task forces and coalitions may be undermined by informal competition and mistrust between agencies, while information sharing protocols may be inadequate for the needs of complex trafficking investigations and victim service delivery. The leadership and accountability structures for interagency coordination may be unclear or ineffective in resolving conflicts and ensuring follow-through on collaborative commitments. The legal and policy frameworks that govern institutional responses to trafficking may contain gaps, contradictions, or implementation challenges that limit their effectiveness in addressing trafficking crimes and protecting victims. Anti-trafficking laws may not cover all forms of exploitation that occur in practice, while immigration policies may create barriers for trafficking victims seeking legal status and protection. The implementation of trafficking laws and policies may vary significantly across different jurisdictions and agencies, creating inconsistencies in how similar cases are handled and what services are available to victims. The public-private partnerships that involve collaboration between government agencies and non-governmental organizations often struggle with differences in organizational culture, accountability requirements, and operational priorities that can create tension and limit effectiveness. Private organizations may have more flexibility and specialized expertise, while government agencies may have greater resources and legal authority, but these complementary strengths may not be effectively leveraged if partnership structures are poorly designed or inadequately supported. The funding relationships between government and private organizations can create dependencies and conflicts that affect program design and implementation. The technology and information systems that support anti-trafficking efforts may be inadequate for the complexity of trafficking investigations and victim service delivery, while also raising privacy and security concerns that must be balanced against operational needs. Information sharing between agencies may be limited by incompatible technology systems, while the use of technology for surveillance and investigation may raise civil liberties concerns. The development and maintenance of effective information systems requires ongoing investment and technical expertise that may not be available within anti-trafficking organizations. The community engagement and civil society involvement in anti-trafficking efforts can provide valuable resources and expertise while also creating accountability and oversight that improves institutional performance. Community organizations may have better access to vulnerable populations and greater understanding of local conditions, while faith-based and advocacy organizations may provide specialized services and political support for anti-trafficking efforts. The involvement of survivors in anti-trafficking programs can provide valuable insights and expertise while also creating opportunities for meaningful participation and leadership development. The accountability and oversight mechanisms that monitor institutional responses to trafficking often lack the independence, resources, and authority needed to ensure effective performance and address problems when they arise. Internal oversight systems may be compromised by organizational conflicts of interest, while external oversight may lack access to information and resources needed for effective monitoring. The political and administrative pressures that affect anti-trafficking organizations may create incentives to avoid accountability and transparency rather than embracing oversight as a tool for improvement and reform. Chapter 5: Pathways to Freedom. The process of escaping trafficking situations and rebuilding lives after exploitation involves complex challenges that extend far beyond the immediate moment of physical freedom to include long-term recovery from trauma, reintegration into society, and protection from re-victimization. Understanding the pathways to freedom reveals both the individual resilience and institutional support that are necessary for survivors to rebuild their lives, while also highlighting the systemic changes needed to prevent trafficking and protect vulnerable populations. The escape and rescue dynamics that lead to freedom from trafficking situations vary significantly, depending on victim circumstances, trafficker control methods, and available support systems, with many victims eventually escaping through their own efforts rather than through law enforcement rescue operations. Self-liberation may occur when victims identify opportunities to escape and have access to resources or assistance that enable them to leave trafficking situations, while rescue operations may be more common in cases where victims are held in remote locations or under heavy surveillance. The romanticized narratives about trafficking rescue that appear in media and advocacy materials may not reflect the complex realities of how most victims actually achieve freedom. The immediate safety and stabilization needs that trafficking survivors face after escaping exploitation include securing safe housing, addressing urgent medical needs, and connecting with support services, while also managing the psychological and emotional impact of their experiences. The transition from exploitation to freedom can be disorienting and frightening for survivors who may have become accustomed to having all decisions made for them, while also fearing retaliation from traffickers or rejection from family and community. Emergency services for trafficking survivors must be available immediately and must be designed to address the unique needs and vulnerabilities of this population. The trauma-informed care approaches that are essential for effective survivor services recognize that trafficking experiences create complex trauma that affects all aspects of survivors' functioning and recovery, while also understanding that traditional service delivery models may inadvertently re-traumatize survivors through practices that mirror aspects of their exploitation experiences. Trauma-informed services emphasize survivor choice and control, cultural responsiveness, and the importance of building trust and safety in all interactions. The development of trauma-informed organizational cultures requires ongoing training and support for service providers, while also requiring changes in policies and procedures that may have been designed for other populations. The legal status and immigration issues that affect many trafficking survivors can create ongoing vulnerability and limit access to services and opportunities for rebuilding their lives. Survivors who are not citizens of the countries where they were exploited may face deportation to countries where they may be unsafe or may lack family and community support, while the immigration relief available to trafficking victims may be limited or difficult to obtain. The complexity of immigration law and the potential consequences of immigration status decisions require specialized legal assistance that may not be readily available to trafficking survivors. The economic empowerment and employment support that survivors need to achieve long-term independence involves addressing both immediate income needs and longer-term career development opportunities, while also recognizing that survivors may have limited work experience, education, or professional skills due to their exploitation experiences. Job training and placement programs for survivors must be designed to accommodate the unique needs and circumstances of this population, while also providing the support and flexibility needed for recovery and healing. The development of survivor-led businesses and cooperatives can provide economic opportunities while also creating supportive environments for healing and empowerment. The mental health and psychological recovery services that trafficking survivors require often involve specialized treatment for complex trauma, depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems that may require long-term therapeutic support and medication management. Traditional mental health services may not be adequately prepared to address the unique needs of trafficking survivors, while the stigma associated with trafficking experiences may create additional barriers to seeking and receiving mental health care. The integration of mental health services with other survivor support services can improve accessibility and effectiveness, while also reducing the burden on survivors to navigate multiple service systems. The family reunification and relationship rebuilding challenges that many survivors face involve addressing the impact of trafficking on family relationships, while also managing concerns about safety, stigma, and cultural issues that may affect family acceptance and support. Families may blame survivors for their experiences or may not understand the impact of trafficking on their loved ones, while survivors may feel shame or guilt about their experiences that affects their willingness to reconnect with family members. Family counseling and education services can help address these challenges while also providing support for both survivors and their family members. The education and skill development opportunities that can help survivors build new lives and careers may need to accommodate interrupted education, language barriers, and learning differences that may have resulted from trafficking experiences, while also providing flexible scheduling and supportive environments that recognize the ongoing impact of trauma on learning and concentration. Educational programs for survivors should be designed to build on survivors' existing strengths and interests, while also providing practical skills that can lead to employment and economic independence. The housing and residential support that trafficking survivors need may require specialized programs that can provide safety and security, while also accommodating the unique needs and vulnerabilities of this population. Traditional homeless services may not be appropriate for trafficking survivors who may require enhanced security, specialized services, and longer-term support than is typically available through emergency housing programs. The development of survivor-specific housing programs requires understanding of trafficking dynamics and trauma impact, while also providing pathways to independent living. The peer support and survivor leadership opportunities that can be powerful components of recovery and empowerment involve connecting survivors with others who have had similar experiences, while also creating opportunities for survivors to use their experiences and insights to help others and advocate for systemic change. Survivor leadership in anti-trafficking efforts can provide valuable perspectives and expertise, while also creating meaningful opportunities for personal growth and empowerment. The development of survivor leadership requires ongoing support and training, while also ensuring that survivors are not re-traumatized by their involvement in anti-trafficking work. The prevention and protection advocacy that survivors can engage in provides opportunities for meaningful participation in efforts to address trafficking, while also contributing to systemic change that can protect other vulnerable individuals. Survivor advocates can provide unique insights about trafficking dynamics, victim needs, and effective intervention strategies, while also serving as powerful voices for policy and practice changes. The support for survivor advocacy requires providing training, resources, and platforms for survivors to share their expertise, while also ensuring that their participation is voluntary and appropriately supported. The long-term recovery and life rebuilding process that trafficking survivors engage in is typically measured in years rather than months, and may involve ongoing challenges related to trauma, relationships, employment, and other aspects of rebuilding their lives. Recovery is not a linear process, and may involve setbacks and challenges that require ongoing support and understanding from service providers and community members. The success of survivor recovery should be measured by survivors' own definitions of healing and empowerment, rather than external standards that may not reflect survivors' values and priorities. The systemic change and prevention efforts that can reduce trafficking vulnerability and improve responses to trafficking crimes require addressing the root causes of trafficking, including poverty, inequality, discrimination, and lack of opportunity, while also strengthening legal protections and support systems for vulnerable populations. Effective prevention requires long-term investments in education, economic development, and social justice efforts that may extend far beyond traditional anti-trafficking programs. The involvement of survivors in prevention and systemic change efforts can provide valuable guidance, while also creating opportunities for meaningful participation in efforts to address the problems they have experienced firsthand. The measurement of success in anti-trafficking efforts should include not only the number of victims rescued or traffickers prosecuted, but also the long-term outcomes for survivors and the reduction in trafficking vulnerability within communities and populations. Success metrics should be developed in partnership with survivors and should reflect their priorities and definitions of successful recovery and empowerment. The evaluation of anti-trafficking efforts should also consider the broader social and economic impacts of these programs, while assessing their effectiveness in addressing root causes and preventing future trafficking.
The Hidden Dangers of Social Media, How It's Affecting Your Life. Written by Joseph Hertz. Chapter 1. The Psychology of Digital Manipulation. Social media platforms employ sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques designed by teams of neuroscientists, behavioral economists, and data scientists who use principles of addiction psychology to maximize user engagement and time spent on their platforms. These techniques operate below the level of conscious awareness, hijacking natural reward systems in the brain while creating compulsive usage patterns that can be extremely difficult to control even when users recognize their problematic relationship with these platforms. Variable ratio reinforcement schedules, borrowed directly from casino gambling research, form the foundation of social media engagement systems through unpredictable delivery of likes, comments, shares, and other forms of social validation. This intermittent reinforcement creates powerful psychological conditioning that triggers dopamine release in anticipation of potential rewards, making the act of checking social media inherently addictive, regardless of whether any actual social interaction or meaningful content is discovered. The infinite scroll design eliminates natural stopping points that might allow users to pause and consider whether they want to continue consuming content, creating seamless experiences that can consume hours without users realizing how much time has passed. This design pattern exploits the brain's novelty-seeking mechanisms by ensuring that potentially interesting content always appears to be just one more scroll away, making it psychologically difficult to disengage from the platform. Social validation metrics, including likes, shares, comments, and follower counts, transform normal human social interaction into quantified gaming systems that can become primary sources of self-worth and social status. These metrics exploit fundamental human needs for acceptance and belonging by providing immediate feedback about social approval, while creating competitive dynamics that encourage users to modify their behavior to maximize positive responses rather than express authentic thoughts and feelings. Fear of missing out, FOMO, is systematically cultivated through algorithmic content curation that highlights the most engaging activities, achievements, and experiences of other users while filtering out mundane or negative content. This creates distorted perceptions of other people's lives that can generate anxiety, dissatisfaction, and compulsive platform checking as users seek to stay updated on social activities and opportunities they might be missing. Attention hijacking occurs through push notifications, red badge icons, and other interruption techniques designed to break concentration and draw users back to platforms throughout the day. These interruptions fragment attention and reduce productivity, while creating anxiety and stress responses when users attempt to resist the urge to check their devices immediately upon receiving notifications. Emotional manipulation through algorithmic content selection prioritizes posts that generate strong emotional responses, including anger, outrage, and controversy, because these emotions drive higher engagement rates than positive or neutral content. This systematic amplification of negative emotions can distort users' perceptions of reality, while contributing to increased anxiety, depression, and social conflict. Personalization algorithms create filter bubbles that reinforce existing beliefs and preferences, while limiting exposure to diverse perspectives and challenging information. These algorithmic echo chambers can intensify political polarization, reduce empathy for different viewpoints, and create false confidence in beliefs that may be based on incomplete or biased information. Social comparison facilitation occurs through platform design features that make it easy to compare personal achievements, appearance, lifestyle, and success metrics with those of other users. These comparison mechanisms exploit natural tendencies towards social evaluation, while amplifying the psychological effects of upward social comparison that can reduce self-esteem and life satisfaction. Parasocial relationships with influencers, celebrities, and other online personalities can substitute for genuine social connections while providing none of the reciprocal support and meaningful interaction that characterize healthy relationships. These one-sided relationships can create false intimacy and emotional investment that diverts time and energy away from developing real friendships and romantic partnerships. Behavioral data collection enables platforms to build detailed psychological profiles that predict user preferences, emotional states, and vulnerabilities with remarkable accuracy. This information is used to optimize manipulation techniques for individual users, while also being sold to advertisers and other third parties who can use psychological insights for commercial or political influence. A/B testing and psychological experimentation conducted by social media companies involve systematic manipulation of user experiences to identify the most effective techniques for increasing engagement, ad clicking, and platform loyalty. These experiments are conducted without informed consent and may deliberately induce negative emotional states if they increase overall platform usage. Cognitive load manipulation through rapid content switching, multiple notification streams, and complex interface designs can overwhelm mental processing capacity, while reducing the quality of attention users can devote to any single piece of content. This fragmentation of attention can impair learning, memory formation, and critical thinking, while making users more susceptible to emotional manipulation and poor decision-making. Addiction progression typically follows predictable patterns, beginning with casual usage that gradually increases in frequency and duration, as psychological conditioning strengthens tolerance to platform rewards, while requiring increasing amounts of usage to achieve the same psychological satisfaction. Users may experience withdrawal symptoms including anxiety, restlessness, and depression when unable to access social media, while unsuccessful attempts to reduce usage create shame and loss of self-control. Understanding the psychological manipulation techniques employed by social media platforms is crucial for developing conscious usage patterns and protecting mental health from systems designed to exploit human psychology for commercial gain. This awareness can inform decisions about platform usage while supporting the development of healthier relationships with digital technology that serve genuine human needs rather than corporate profit motives. Chapter 2: The Mental Health Crisis Hidden in Plain Sight. Social media usage has been consistently linked to increased rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, and other mental health problems across multiple demographic groups, with particularly strong associations among teenagers and young adults who have grown up with these platforms as integral parts of their social development. This mental health crisis often remains hidden because it develops gradually through daily interactions with platforms that appear harmless while systematically undermining psychological well-being through multiple mechanisms. Depression rates among teenagers have increased dramatically since the widespread adoption of social media, with some studies showing increases of 50% or more in clinical depression among adolescents during the period of rapid social media growth. The correlation between social media usage and depression appears to be dose-dependent, with heavier users showing higher rates of depressive symptoms, while studies that track usage changes over time show corresponding changes in mood and life satisfaction. Anxiety disorders, including social anxiety, generalized anxiety, and panic disorders, have become increasingly common among social media users who experience chronic stress from social comparison, cyberbullying, fear of missing out, and the pressure to maintain online personas that may differ significantly from their authentic selves. The constant connectivity enabled by mobile devices means that social stressors follow users throughout their daily lives, preventing the natural recovery periods that occur when social interaction is limited to specific times and places. Suicide rates and suicidal ideation have increased significantly among young people, with particular increases noted among groups that use social media most heavily. Online harassment, cyberbullying, and social exclusion can create intense psychological distress, while the viral nature of online humiliation can make negative experiences seem inescapable and permanent. Social media platforms may also facilitate suicide contagion effects, where exposure to suicide-related content increases the risk of suicidal behavior among vulnerable users. Body image disorders and eating disorders have been consistently linked to social media usage, particularly platforms that emphasize visual content and physical appearance. The constant exposure to filtered, edited, and curated images creates unrealistic beauty standards, while encouraging comparisons with idealized presentations that are impossible to achieve in reality. The quantification of physical attractiveness through likes and comments on photos can intensify body dissatisfaction, while social media dieting and fitness content may promote disordered eating behaviors. Sleep disorders affect the majority of heavy social media users through blue light exposure that disrupts circadian rhythms, mental stimulation that prevents relaxation before bedtime, and anxiety about missing social interactions that creates compulsive late-night usage. Poor sleep quality exacerbates other mental health problems, while reducing the cognitive and emotional resources necessary for healthy social interaction and decision-making. Attention deficit symptoms including difficulty concentrating, hyperactivity, and impulsivity have increased among social media users as platforms train the brain to expect constant stimulation and rapid task switching. The fragmented attention required by social media interfaces can impair the ability to engage in sustained focus required for academic work, professional tasks, and meaningful social relationships. Social anxiety has paradoxically increased among many social media users, despite increased digital connectivity, as online interaction replaces face-to-face communication skills while creating new forms of social performance anxiety. The pressure to maintain engaging online personas, respond to messages promptly, and navigate complex social dynamics through text-based communication can increase rather than reduce social stress. Addiction and compulsive usage behaviors affect millions of social media users who experience loss of control over their platform usage despite negative consequences for their relationships, work, and mental health. Social media addiction shares many characteristics with substance addictions, including tolerance, withdrawal, unsuccessful attempts to quit, and continued usage despite awareness of harmful effects. Cyberbullying and online harassment create psychological trauma that can be more severe than face-to-face bullying, because online harassment can be constant, anonymous, and witnessed by large audiences. The permanent nature of digital content means that humiliating experiences can be preserved and reshared indefinitely, while the global reach of social media can expose victims to harassment from strangers around the world. Identity confusion and authenticity problems develop when users spend significant time managing online personas that differ from their authentic selves, leading to psychological fragmentation and uncertainty about their true identities, values, and preferences. The pressure to present idealized versions of oneself online can prevent the development of authentic self-knowledge and self-acceptance that are crucial for mental health. Emotional regulation difficulties can develop as users become dependent on external validation through social media metrics rather than developing internal sources of self-worth and emotional stability. The rapid fluctuations in social feedback that characterize social media interactions can create emotional instability and mood swings that make it difficult to maintain consistent emotional equilibrium. Relationship problems, including romantic relationship conflicts, family tensions, and friendship difficulties, often develop as social media usage interferes with face-to-face interaction while creating new sources of jealousy, misunderstanding, and social comparison. The public nature of many social media interactions can create relationship conflicts, while the addictive nature of platform usage can reduce time and attention available for nurturing real-world relationships. Academic and professional performance often suffers as social media usage interferes with concentration, study habits, and work productivity, while the instant gratification provided by social media makes it difficult to engage in the sustained effort required for academic and career achievement. Students and workers may find themselves unable to focus on important tasks without frequent social media breaks that fragment their attention and reduce performance quality. Existential and meaning-making difficulties can develop as social media usage replaces activities that provide genuine purpose and fulfillment with superficial digital interactions that may provide temporary entertainment but little lasting satisfaction. The time consumed by social media may reduce engagement with hobbies, volunteering, creative pursuits, and other activities that contribute to psychological well-being and life satisfaction. Understanding the mental health impacts of social media is crucial for making informed decisions about platform usage, while recognizing when social media habits may be contributing to psychological distress. This awareness can guide efforts to modify usage patterns, seek professional help when needed, and develop alternative sources of social connection and self-worth that support, rather than undermine mental health. Chapter 3: The Destruction of Real Relationships and Social Skills. Social media platforms fundamentally alter the nature of human relationships by replacing rich, multidimensional face-to-face interactions with simplified digital communications that lack the emotional depth, nonverbal cues, and genuine intimacy that characterize healthy relationships. This transformation often occurs gradually and unconsciously, leaving users with larger numbers of digital connections, but fewer meaningful relationships that provide genuine support, understanding, and emotional fulfillment. Face-to-face communication skills deteriorate as digital communication becomes the primary mode of social interaction, particularly among young people who develop social competencies through online platforms rather than in-person experiences. The absence of nonverbal communication in most digital interactions means that users may struggle to read facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones that convey crucial emotional information in real-world social situations. Superficial connections replace deep friendships, as social media encourages broad networks of casual acquaintances rather than intensive relationships with smaller numbers of close friends. The ease of digital communication can create the illusion of social connection while lacking the commitment, vulnerability, and mutual support that characterize genuine friendships developed through shared experiences and consistent interaction over time. Empathy reduction occurs as digital communication lacks the immediate emotional feedback that helps people understand the impact of their words and actions on others. The physical distance and screen mediation involved in online interaction can make it easier to say hurtful things while reducing awareness of how communication affects other people's emotions and well-being. Conflict resolution skills may not develop properly when most disagreements are handled through digital communication that lacks the nuanced negotiation and emotional regulation required for healthy conflict resolution. The ability to block, unfriend, or ignore people online can prevent the development of skills needed to work through disagreements and repair relationships after conflicts occur. Attention fragmentation during in-person interactions occurs when people check phones, respond to notifications, or mentally focus on social media during face-to-face conversations. This divided attention reduces the quality of real-world interactions while sending implicit messages that digital connections are more important than present company. Romantic relationships suffer from social media usage through multiple mechanisms, including increased opportunities for infidelity, jealousy about partners' online interactions, comparison with idealized relationship presentations, and reduced intimacy as couple time is interrupted by digital distractions. The public nature of many social media interactions can create relationship conflicts, while dating apps may encourage treating potential partners as commodities rather than complex human beings. Family relationships can be undermined when family members prioritize digital interactions over family time, creating emotional distance and reducing the shared experiences that build family bonds. Children may compete with devices for parental attention, while parents may model problematic technology usage that children replicate in their own social development. Social anxiety can increase as people become more comfortable with controlled digital interactions than unpredictable face-to-face encounters, creating cycles where online communication preference leads to reduced real-world social experience, which increases anxiety about in-person interaction. The ability to edit, delete, and craft responses in digital communication can make spontaneous real-world conversation feel threatening and uncomfortable. Loneliness paradoxically increases for many social media users, despite expanded digital social networks, as online connections often fail to provide the emotional support, physical presence, and deep understanding that alleviate feelings of isolation. The quantification of social interaction through metrics like followers and likes can make social relationships feel transactional rather than genuinely caring. Dating and courtship patterns have been fundamentally altered by social media and dating apps that encourage rapid judgments based on limited information, while reducing the gradual relationship development that allows people to discover compatibility and build genuine emotional connections. The abundance of apparent choices through dating platforms can create paradox of choice effects that make commitment more difficult, while encouraging people to constantly evaluate whether better options might be available. Parenting relationships are affected when parents use social media to share information about their children, without considering how this exposure might affect children's privacy, safety, and future opportunities. Sharenting can create digital footprints for children before they are old enough to consent, while potentially exposing them to strangers who may not have good intentions. Social comparison toxicity occurs when people constantly compare their real lives to the curated highlights shared by others on social media, creating unrealistic expectations about relationships, success, and happiness while reducing satisfaction with their own circumstances. These comparisons can damage relationships by creating dissatisfaction with partners, friends, and family members who cannot compete with idealized online presentations. Peer pressure and conformity intensify in social media environments where social acceptance can be quantified through metrics, and where unpopular opinions or nonconformist behavior can result in public criticism or social exclusion. The pressure to maintain acceptable online personas can prevent authentic self-expression, while encouraging people to modify their values and behavior to fit social media expectations. Communication quality deteriorates as abbreviated text-based communication replaces nuanced verbal and nonverbal communication that conveys emotional subtlety and complex ideas. The character limits and rapid pace of social media communication can encourage oversimplification of complex topics, while reducing patience for the thoughtful communication required for meaningful relationships. Trust and reliability in relationships can be undermined when people prioritize online validation over commitments to real-world relationships, canceling plans or neglecting responsibilities to maintain their social media presence. The addictive nature of social media can make users unreliable partners, friends, and family members who struggle to be fully present in their real-world relationships. Understanding how social media affects relationships and social skills is crucial for maintaining healthy connections while developing authentic social competencies that support long-term relationship satisfaction and emotional well-being. This awareness can guide decisions about balancing digital and face-to-face communication while prioritizing the relationships and social experiences that provide genuine fulfillment and support. Chapter 4: The Information Warfare Against Your Mind. Social media platforms have become primary battlegrounds for information warfare, where foreign governments, political organizations, corporations, and other actors deliberately spread misinformation, propaganda, and manipulative content designed to influence public opinion, political beliefs, and consumer behavior. This information warfare operates through sophisticated techniques that exploit psychological vulnerabilities, while making it increasingly difficult for users to distinguish reliable information from deliberately deceptive content. Foreign interference operations conducted by nation-states use social media platforms to influence domestic politics, sow social division, and undermine trust in democratic institutions through coordinated networks of fake accounts, bots, and human operatives who amplify divisive content while posing as authentic local voices. These operations have been documented in multiple countries and elections, demonstrating how social media can be weaponized to attack democratic processes from within. Echo chambers and filter bubbles created by algorithmic content curation can trap users in information environments that reinforce existing beliefs while filtering out contradictory evidence and diverse perspectives. These algorithmic systems learn user preferences and serve content that generates engagement, often prioritizing emotionally provocative material that confirms pre-existing biases rather than accurate, balanced information. Misinformation spread through social media travels faster and reaches wider audiences than factual information, because false stories often contain more emotionally engaging content that triggers sharing behavior. The viral nature of social media amplifies misinformation, while fact-checking and corrections typically receive less attention and engagement than the original false claims. Deepfakes and manipulated media represent emerging threats where artificial intelligence can create convincing fake videos, audio recordings, and images that can be used to spread false information or damage reputations. While the technology is still developing, even crude manipulated media can be effective when it confirms existing beliefs or biases. Micro-targeting capabilities allow political and commercial actors to deliver different messages to different demographic groups based on detailed psychological profiles derived from social media activity and data broker information. This personalized manipulation can present contradictory information to different audiences, while making it difficult for the broader public to understand what messages are being disseminated. AstroTurfing operations create fake grassroots movements and public opinion campaigns, using networks of fake accounts and bots that simulate authentic public support for particular causes, products, or political positions. These artificial movements can influence real public opinion by creating false impressions of popular support while drowning out genuine grassroots voices. Algorithmic amplification of extreme content occurs because controversial and emotionally provocative posts generate higher engagement rates than moderate or factual content, leading algorithms to systematically promote divisive material that may radicalize users while marginalizing balanced perspectives. This amplification effect can push users toward increasingly extreme viewpoints over time. Surveillance capitalism business models require platforms to gather detailed personal information that can be used to predict and influence user behavior, creating incentive structures where user manipulation serves platform profitability. The data collected through social media enables sophisticated targeting and influence operations that serve commercial interests rather than user well-being or democratic discourse. Conspiracy theory propagation through social media algorithms can lead users down rabbit holes of increasingly extreme and disconnected beliefs as recommendation systems guide them toward more engaging conspiracy content. The social validation provided by online conspiracy communities can reinforce false beliefs while isolating users from friends and family who might provide reality checks. Political polarization intensifies through social media mechanisms that reward extreme positions while punishing moderate viewpoints that generate less engagement. The competitive dynamics of social media attention can incentivize political actors to take increasingly extreme positions while demonizing opposition groups to maximize social media engagement and follower growth. Influencer manipulation occurs when social media personalities with large followings are paid or incentivized to promote particular products, political positions, or ideas without disclosing these relationships to their audiences. Parasocial relationships between influencers and followers can make these hidden influence operations particularly effective because followers trust influencers as authentic sources rather than recognizing them as paid advocates. News credibility erosion occurs as social media platforms become primary news sources, while lacking the editorial oversight and journalistic standards that traditionally helped distinguish reliable from unreliable information. The mixing of entertainment, opinion, and news content on social media can blur these distinctions while reducing media literacy skills needed to evaluate information quality. Data manipulation through selective presentation of statistics, research findings, and other evidence can create false impressions about scientific consensus, public opinion, and factual questions while appearing to provide objective information. The complexity of many issues makes it difficult for non-experts to evaluate whether information is being presented accurately or manipulatively. Psychological operations, PSYOPs, conducted through social media can use sophisticated understanding of cognitive biases and emotional triggers to influence public opinion on important issues including elections, policy debates, and social movements. These operations often combine true and false information in ways that make deception difficult to detect, while gradually shifting public attitudes over time. Information overload from the constant stream of social media content can overwhelm users' ability to critically evaluate information, while encouraging rapid judgments based on emotional responses rather than careful analysis. The pace and volume of information on social media platforms can make thoughtful consideration impossible, while encouraging sharing before verification. Understanding information warfare tactics is crucial for developing critical thinking skills and information literacy that can protect against manipulation while supporting informed democratic participation. This awareness can guide development of better information evaluation skills, while supporting policies and platform designs that prioritize truth and democratic discourse over engagement and profit maximization. Chapter 5: Breaking Free and Reclaiming Your Life. Escaping the psychological manipulation and negative effects of social media requires conscious effort, strategic planning, and often significant lifestyle changes that prioritize genuine human connections and authentic experiences over digital engagement. This liberation process involves both reducing harmful social media usage and developing alternative sources of meaning, connection, and entertainment that provide genuine fulfillment rather than artificial stimulation designed to serve corporate interests. Digital detox strategies begin with honest assessment of current social media usage patterns through phone screen time tracking, usage monitoring apps, or manual logging to understand the true extent of platform engagement and identify the specific triggers and habits that drive compulsive usage. This awareness provides the foundation for developing conscious usage patterns that align with personal values rather than algorithmic manipulation. Gradual reduction approaches often work better than attempting complete elimination of social media because sudden cessation can trigger withdrawal symptoms and rebound usage that undermines long-term success. Progressive reduction might involve decreasing daily usage time, eliminating specific platforms, or restricting usage to certain times of day, while building alternative habits that provide similar psychological rewards through healthier activities. Notification management represents one of the most important steps for reducing social media's intrusive effects on attention and daily life. Turning off push notifications, removing apps from easily accessible home screen locations, and using focus modes or do not disturb settings can significantly reduce the interruption and attention hijacking that characterize problematic social media usage. Physical environment modification, including removing devices from bedrooms, creating device-free zones in homes, and establishing charging stations outside of living areas, can reduce the environmental cues that trigger automatic social media checking while supporting better sleep quality and face-to-face social interaction. Alternative activity development involves identifying and pursuing activities that provide genuine satisfaction and meaning as replacements for the artificial stimulation provided by social media platforms. These might include physical exercise, creative pursuits, reading, outdoor activities, volunteering, or learning new skills that contribute to personal growth and life satisfaction. Real-world social connection prioritization requires conscious effort to build and maintain face-to-face relationships through regular social activities, deeper conversations, and shared experiences that provide the emotional fulfillment and support that social media cannot replicate. This might involve joining clubs, participating in community activities, or simply investing more time and attention in existing relationships. Mindfulness and meditation practices can help develop awareness of the psychological triggers and compulsive behaviors that drive social media usage, while building capacity for sustained attention and emotional regulation that reduces susceptibility to digital manipulation. Regular mindfulness practice can also increase satisfaction with present-moment experiences that compete with the constant stimulation seeking that characterizes social media addiction. Critical thinking skill development helps protect against misinformation and manipulation by building capacity to evaluate information sources, recognize logical fallacies, understand statistical manipulation, and distinguish between reliable and unreliable information. These skills become increasingly important as information warfare tactics become more sophisticated and pervasive. Identity reconstruction may be necessary for heavy social media users who have defined themselves largely through their online personas and digital social interactions. Developing authentic self-knowledge based on real-world experiences, values, and relationships rather than social media metrics requires time and conscious effort, but provides more stable and satisfying foundations for self-worth. Professional help may be necessary for people who cannot control their social media usage, despite negative consequences for their mental health, relationships, work, or other important life areas. Therapists who specialize in digital addiction can provide support and strategies for overcoming compulsive usage while addressing underlying mental health issues that may contribute to problematic social media use. Platform setting optimization for users who choose to maintain some social media presence involves adjusting privacy settings, unfollowing accounts that trigger negative emotions, using tools to limit usage time, and curating feeds to prioritize positive and meaningful content over inflammatory or manipulative material. Educational advocacy involves sharing knowledge about social media manipulation and negative effects with friends, family, and community members, while supporting policies and regulations that could make social media platforms safer and less manipulative. This collective action can help protect others while supporting systemic changes that address the root causes of social media harm. Creative expression and meaningful work provide alternative sources of fulfillment and accomplishment that can replace the artificial achievements and social validation that social media provides. Pursuing creative projects, professional development, or meaningful work can provide genuine satisfaction while building skills and relationships that contribute to long-term life satisfaction. Financial awareness involves understanding how personal data and attention are monetized by social media companies, while considering the true costs of free platforms in terms of time, mental health, and privacy. This economic perspective can motivate more conscious usage decisions while supporting alternative platforms and services that prioritize user welfare over advertising revenue. Nature connection and outdoor activities provide psychological restoration and perspective that can counteract the artificial stimulation and indoor focus that characterizes heavy social media usage. Regular time in natural environments supports mental health while providing experiences that social media cannot replicate or commodify. Long-term lifestyle design involves creating life structures and routines that support well-being and authentic human connection, while minimizing exposure to digital manipulation and artificial stimulation. This might include career choices that allow for better work-life balance, living arrangements that support social connection, and daily routines that prioritize health and meaningful activities over digital consumption. Understanding that breaking free from social media manipulation is an ongoing process rather than a one-time achievement helps maintain motivation and prevents discouragement when setbacks occur. Building resilience against digital manipulation requires sustained effort and regular recommitment to values and practices that support genuine human flourishing rather than corporate profit maximization. Creating authentic life satisfaction independent of social media validation requires developing internal sources of self-worth, meaning, and connection that are based on real-world accomplishments, relationships, and experiences rather than digital metrics and online approval. This transformation can lead to significantly improved mental health, relationship quality, and overall life satisfaction, while providing protection against future digital manipulation and exploitation.
The Truth About Your Food, What's Really in Your Plate. By Joseph Hertz. Chapter 1, From Field to Fork, The Journey You Never See. The modern food system has created an almost complete disconnect between consumers and the origins of their food, making it virtually impossible for ordinary people to understand what they are actually eating or how it was produced. This separation is not accidental, but rather the result of deliberate industrial design that prioritizes efficiency, profit, and convenience over transparency, quality, and consumer awareness. Understanding the true journey that food takes from its origins to your plate reveals a complex web of processes, treatments, and transformations that fundamentally alter the nature of what we consume. The agricultural origins of most food products today involve farming practices that would be unrecognizable to consumers who imagine their food coming from traditional family farms with rolling green fields and red barns. Modern industrial agriculture operates through massive monoculture operations, where single crops are grown on thousands of acres, using machinery, chemical inputs, and production methods that have more in common with manufacturing than with traditional farming. These operations are designed to maximize yield and minimize labor costs, often at the expense of soil health, environmental sustainability, and nutritional quality. The genetic modification of crops has become so pervasive that the vast majority of corn, soybeans, cotton, and other major crops grown in developed countries contain genetic material that has been artificially inserted from other species. These genetically modified organisms are designed to exhibit traits that benefit industrial agriculture, such as resistance to herbicides or the ability to produce their own pesticides. While regulatory agencies have declared these crops safe for human consumption, the long-term health effects of eating genetically modified foods remain largely unknown, particularly regarding the cumulative effects of consuming multiple genetically modified ingredients over extended periods. The chemical inputs used in modern agriculture create a complex cocktail of synthetic substances that remain present in food products as residues, often at levels that are considered safe individually, but whose combined effects have never been adequately studied. Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and other agricultural chemicals are designed to kill living organisms, yet they inevitably remain in food at levels that regulatory agencies have determined pose acceptable risks. The determination of acceptable risk levels is based on studies of individual chemicals rather than the complex mixtures that consumers actually encounter in their daily diets. The post-harvest treatment of crops involves a series of chemical and physical processes designed to prevent spoilage, maintain appearance, and facilitate transportation and storage. Fruits and vegetables may be treated with waxes, preservatives, and ripening agents that affect both their nutritional content and their safety. Grains and other crops may be fumigated with chemical pesticides, treated with preservatives, or processed in facilities that use industrial chemicals for cleaning and pest control. These post-harvest treatments are often invisible to consumers, but can significantly affect the quality and safety of food products. The transportation system that moves food from farms to processing facilities to distribution centers to retail stores involves extended periods during which food may be exposed to temperature fluctuations, chemical treatments, and contamination risks that can affect both safety and nutritional quality. The average food item travels hundreds or thousands of miles from where it was produced to where it is consumed, requiring extensive use of preservatives, refrigeration systems, and packaging materials that can affect the final product in ways that consumers never see. The processing facilities where raw agricultural products are transformed into the packaged foods that fill supermarket shelves operate as industrial manufacturing operations that use chemical additives, mechanical treatments, and thermal processing to create products with extended shelf life and consistent appearance. These facilities often process thousands of tons of food daily, using automated systems that may have limited quality control and contamination prevention measures. The scale and speed of industrial food processing create vulnerabilities to contamination and quality problems that can affect thousands of consumers before problems are detected. The packaging systems used for processed foods involve complex materials and chemical treatments that can affect food safety and quality through migration of substances from packaging into food. Plastic containers, can linings, and other packaging materials contain chemicals that can leach into food, particularly when exposed to heat or acidic conditions. The multi-layer packaging systems used for many processed foods involve adhesives, inks, and barrier materials that can contribute chemical residues to food products. The storage and distribution systems that maintain food quality from processing facilities to retail stores involve warehouses, transportation networks, and handling procedures that can affect food safety and quality in ways that are largely invisible to consumers. Food products may spend weeks or months in storage and transportation before reaching retail outlets, during which time they may be exposed to temperature fluctuations, pest contamination, or other conditions that affect their quality and safety. The retail environment where consumers purchase food products often involves additional treatments and handling procedures that can affect food quality and safety. Fruits and vegetables may be treated with additional preservatives, subjected to artificial lighting systems, or handled in ways that affect their nutritional content and safety. The refrigeration and storage systems used in retail stores may not always maintain optimal conditions for food preservation, particularly during peak shopping periods or equipment failures. The labeling and marketing systems that inform consumers about food products often provide incomplete or misleading information about the true nature of food products and their production methods. Regulatory requirements for food labeling focus on certain types of information, while allowing many aspects of food production and processing to remain undisclosed. Marketing terms like natural, fresh, and healthy are often used in ways that do not correspond to meaningful differences in food quality or production methods. The regulatory oversight systems that are supposed to ensure food safety and quality operate with limited resources, conflicting priorities, and institutional relationships that may compromise their effectiveness in protecting consumers. Government agencies responsible for food safety often have close relationships with the industries they regulate, creating potential conflicts of interest that can affect their willingness to implement strict oversight measures. The complexity of modern food systems makes comprehensive oversight extremely difficult, even with adequate resources and political will. The consumer disconnect from food production has been deliberately cultivated by food industry marketing that emphasizes convenience, taste, and emotional associations, while avoiding detailed discussion of production methods and ingredient sourcing. This disconnect makes it difficult for consumers to make informed choices about food, while also reducing pressure on food producers to maintain high standards for quality, safety, and environmental responsibility. Chapter 2: The Chemical Kitchen: Understanding Food Additives. The modern processed food industry relies on thousands of chemical additives that serve functions ranging from preservation and flavor enhancement to color improvement and texture modification. These additives have enabled the creation of food products that can maintain consistent appearance, taste, and safety over extended periods while being transported across great distances and stored for months or years. However, many of these chemical compounds have never existed in the human food supply before the industrial era, and their long-term health effects, particularly in combination with each other, remain largely unknown. The preservation systems used in processed foods involve chemical compounds designed to prevent bacterial growth, inhibit oxidation, and maintain color and texture over extended storage periods. These preservatives include synthetic antioxidants like BHT and BHA, antimicrobial agents like sodium benzoate and potassium sorbate, and various organic acids and their salts that prevent spoilage. While these preservatives serve important food safety functions by preventing dangerous bacterial contamination, they also introduce chemical exposures that can accumulate over time as consumers eat multiple preserved foods daily. The artificial flavor systems used in processed foods represent one of the most complex areas of food chemistry, involving the combination of dozens or even hundreds of different chemical compounds to create single flavors that mimic natural foods or produce entirely new taste experiences. A typical strawberry flavor might contain over 50 different chemical compounds, each precisely measured and combined to create a standardized taste that is often more intense and consistent than natural strawberries. The complexity of these flavor systems means that consumers are exposed to numerous synthetic compounds with every flavored food product they consume. The distinction between natural and artificial flavors is often more a matter of marketing and regulatory classification than actual chemical composition or safety. Natural flavors are derived from plant or animal sources, but may be heavily processed using synthetic chemicals and may bear little resemblance to the original source material. Artificial flavors may be chemically identical to compounds found in nature, but are produced in laboratories using synthetic methods. Both natural and artificial flavors can contain dozens of chemical compounds that are not required to be individually listed on ingredient labels. The color additive systems used in processed foods include both natural pigments extracted from plants, insects, and minerals, and synthetic dyes created in chemical laboratories. These colorings serve no nutritional purpose, but are added to make foods more visually appealing and to maintain consistent appearance across different production batches. Some synthetic food dyes have been linked to behavioral problems in children and other health concerns, leading to regulatory restrictions in some countries while remaining widely used in others. The texture modification systems used in processed foods involve a wide range of compounds that affect how foods feel in the mouth, how they flow during processing, and how they maintain their structure during storage. These additives include emulsifiers that help oil and water mix, thickening agents that create desired consistencies, stabilizers that prevent separation, and anti-caking agents that prevent powdered foods from clumping. Many of these texture modifiers are derived from sources that consumers would not recognize as food ingredients, including various industrial processes and synthetic chemistry. The sweetening systems used in processed foods extend far beyond simple sugar to include a complex array of natural and artificial sweeteners, each with different properties in terms of sweetness intensity, caloric content, and functional characteristics. High-fructose corn syrup has become ubiquitous in processed foods due to its low cost and functional properties, while artificial sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, and acesulfame potassium are used in diet products. Sugar alcohols like sorbitol and xylitol provide sweetness with fewer calories, but can cause digestive problems in some people. The fat replacement and modification systems used in processed foods involve synthetic compounds designed to provide the texture and cooking properties of fats without the caloric content, or to modify the properties of natural fats for specific applications. These fat substitutes range from modified starches and proteins to entirely synthetic compounds that pass through the digestive system without being absorbed. The long-term effects of consuming these fat replacements are not well understood, particularly regarding their impact on nutrient absorption and digestive health. The nutrient fortification systems used in processed foods involve adding synthetic vitamins, minerals, and other compounds to replace nutrients lost during processing or to enhance the nutritional profile of food products. While fortification can improve the nutritional value of processed foods, the synthetic forms of nutrients used may not be absorbed or utilized by the body in the same way as nutrients found naturally in whole foods. The addition of synthetic nutrients can also create imbalances that affect the absorption of other nutrients. The pH control and buffering systems used in processed foods involve various acids, bases, and buffer compounds that maintain optimal acidity levels for food safety, flavor, and processing characteristics. These compounds can affect the taste, safety, and nutritional properties of foods, while also influencing the absorption and utilization of nutrients. The interaction between pH control systems and other food additives can create complex chemical reactions that produce new compounds not originally present in any of the individual ingredients. The enzyme systems used in food processing involve proteins that catalyze specific chemical reactions to achieve desired changes in food properties. These enzymes may be derived from plants, animals, or genetically modified microorganisms and are used to break down proteins, modify starches, improve texture, or extend shelf life. While enzymes are generally considered safe because they are proteins that are broken down during digestion, their use can create new compounds and alter the nutritional properties of foods in ways that are not fully understood. The processing aid chemicals used during food manufacturing include solvents, cleaners, lubricants, and other substances that facilitate production, but are not required to be listed on ingredient labels because they are considered to be removed from the final product. These processing aids can include industrial solvents used to extract flavors and oils, cleaners used to sanitize equipment, and various chemicals used to facilitate mixing, heating, and other processing steps. Residues of these processing aids may remain in finished foods at levels that are considered negligible, but contribute to overall chemical exposure. The interaction effects between different food additives create complex chemical environments that are poorly understood, because safety testing typically evaluates individual compounds rather than the mixtures that consumers actually encounter. A single processed food product might contain dozens of different additives, and a typical diet might include hundreds of different chemical compounds from various processed foods. The cumulative and interactive effects of these chemical exposures represent a massive, uncontrolled experiment in human nutrition and health that continues to evolve as new additives are introduced and consumption patterns change. Chapter 3: The Hidden Ingredients: What Labels Don't Tell You. The ingredient labeling system that governs packaged foods provides consumers with only a partial picture of what their food actually contains. Due to regulatory exemptions, industry trade secrets and labeling practices that can obscure rather than clarify the true nature of food products. Understanding what information is hidden from food labels reveals the extent to which consumers are making food choices based on incomplete and sometimes misleading information about what they are actually eating. The processing aid exemptions that allow certain chemicals used in food production to remain unlisted on ingredient labels create significant gaps in consumer information about food contents. These processing aids include solvents used to extract oils and flavors, cleaning chemicals used to sanitize equipment, enzymes used to modify food properties, and various other substances that may leave residues in finished products. While regulatory agencies consider these residues to be at negligible levels, they contribute to the overall chemical load that consumers encounter without their knowledge. The incidental additive category includes substances that become part of food products through contact with packaging materials, processing equipment, or storage containers, but are not required to be listed on labels because they are not intentionally added. These incidental additives can include chemicals that migrate from plastic packaging, metal compounds from processing equipment, and various contaminants that enter food during production, transportation, or storage. The levels of these substances may be individually small, but their cumulative exposure can be significant. The trade secret protections that allow food companies to keep certain ingredient information confidential create situations where consumers cannot know the complete composition of products they purchase. Flavor compounds, in particular, are often protected as proprietary formulations, allowing companies to list natural flavors or artificial flavors on labels without disclosing the specific chemicals used. These trade secret protections can hide dozens of chemical compounds behind vague terms that provide no meaningful information to consumers. The sub-ingredient labeling exemptions that allow certain compound ingredients to be listed by their common names rather than their complete compositions create additional information gaps. For example, modified food starch can refer to starches that have been chemically altered using various processes and chemicals, but consumers have no way of knowing which specific modifications have been used. Similarly, terms like spices and natural flavors can encompass hundreds of different substances without providing specific information. The percentage threshold exemptions that allow ingredients present in small quantities to be omitted from labels can hide significant chemical exposures when these substances are highly potent, or when consumers eat multiple products containing the same unlisted ingredients. Some additives are effective at very low concentrations and may be present below labeling thresholds while still affecting food properties and potentially consumer health. The cumulative exposure to substances that are individually below labeling thresholds can be substantial. The functional class labeling system that groups additives by their primary function rather than their specific chemical identity can obscure important differences between substances that serve similar purposes but have very different chemical properties and safety profiles. Terms like preservative, emulsifier, and stabilizer provide functional information but do not identify the specific chemicals used, making it impossible for consumers to avoid particular substances they may be concerned about or sensitive to. The multi-component ingredient complexities that arise when processed foods contain other processed foods as ingredients create labeling situations where consumers cannot determine the complete composition of products. For example, a frozen dinner might contain a sauce that itself contains multiple additives, but the frozen dinner label may only list sauce as an ingredient without detailing all the additives in the sauce. These nested ingredient systems can hide extensive chemical complexity behind simple ingredient names. The contamination and cross-contamination issues that affect food products are generally not reflected on ingredient labels, even when they represent significant health risks for some consumers. Manufacturing facilities that process multiple products may have cross-contamination between different production lines, leading to the presence of allergens, additives, or other substances that are not intentionally included in specific products. While allergen warnings are required in many jurisdictions, other forms of cross-contamination may not be disclosed. The country of origin complexities that characterize modern food supply chains mean that ingredient labels often cannot tell consumers where their food actually comes from or what production standards were used. A product may be labeled as manufactured in one country while containing ingredients from dozens of other countries, each with different agricultural practices, safety standards, and regulatory oversight. The global sourcing of ingredients makes it virtually impossible for consumers to trace the origins of their food or understand the conditions under which it was produced. The nutritional information gaps that exist on food labels often fail to capture important aspects of food quality and nutritional value that can be affected by processing methods, ingredient sourcing, and production practices. Standard nutrition labels focus on macronutrients, calories, and a limited number of vitamins and minerals, while providing no information about beneficial compounds that may have been lost during processing, harmful compounds that may have been introduced, or the bioavailability of nutrients in highly processed foods. The organic and natural labeling limitations reveal that even products marketed as healthier alternatives may contain ingredients and processing aids that consumers would not expect. Organic certification allows the use of numerous synthetic substances and processing methods, while natural labeling has limited regulatory meaning and can be applied to products that contain extensively processed ingredients. These marketing terms can create false impressions about food quality and purity, while providing little meaningful information about production methods or ingredient sourcing. The genetically modified organism labeling gaps that exist in many jurisdictions mean that consumers often have no way of knowing whether their food contains genetically modified ingredients. Even where GMO labeling is required, the regulations often contain exemptions for highly processed ingredients derived from genetically modified crops, for products containing small amounts of GMO ingredients, or for certain categories of foods. The prevalence of genetically modified crops in the food supply means that most processed foods likely contain GMO-derived ingredients without disclosure. The restaurant and food service exemptions that exclude most prepared foods from ingredient labeling requirements create enormous information gaps for consumers who eat meals prepared outside their homes. Restaurants, cafeterias, and other food service establishments are generally not required to provide detailed ingredient information, making it impossible for consumers to know what additives, processing aids, or other substances they are consuming. The increasing prevalence of food service consumption means that a significant portion of people's diets involves foods with completely unknown ingredient compositions. Chapter 4: The Industrial Kitchen: How Your Food is Really Made. The manufacturing processes that transform raw agricultural products into the processed foods that dominate modern diets involve industrial operations that use mechanical, thermal, and chemical treatments to create products with extended shelf life, consistent appearance, and standardized taste. These manufacturing processes operate at scales and speeds that would be unimaginable in traditional food preparation, often processing thousands of tons of food daily using automated systems that may have limited human oversight and quality control. The extrusion processing technology used to create many breakfast cereals, snack foods, and textured protein products involves forcing food materials through machines at extremely high temperatures and pressures that fundamentally alter the molecular structure of ingredients. This process can destroy natural nutrients while creating new chemical compounds that may not exist in nature. The high temperature, high pressure conditions used in extrusion can produce potentially harmful substances while requiring the addition of synthetic vitamins and minerals to replace those lost during processing. The ultra-high temperature processing systems used for dairy products, juices, and other beverages involve heating foods to temperatures that kill virtually all microorganisms, but also denature proteins, destroy heat-sensitive vitamins, and create new chemical compounds that were not present in the original food. This thermal processing can alter flavor, nutritional content, and digestibility in ways that require additional processing steps to restore palatability and nutritional value. The chemical extraction processes used to produce oils, protein isolates, sweeteners, and other food ingredients involve industrial solvents and processing methods that can leave chemical residues in finished products. Hexane extraction is commonly used to produce vegetable oils and protein powders, while various acids, bases, and other chemicals are used to extract and purify different food components. While these solvents are supposed to be removed from final products, residues often remain at levels that regulatory agencies consider acceptable, but that represent chemical exposures never encountered in traditional food preparation. The enzymatic processing systems used in food manufacturing involve enzymes that are often derived from genetically modified microorganisms and are used to break down proteins, modify starches, and achieve other changes in food properties. These enzymes can create new compounds and alter the digestibility and nutritional properties of foods in ways that are not well understood. The use of enzymes derived from genetically modified organisms introduces additional questions about safety and labeling that are not adequately addressed by current regulations. The irradiation processing that is used for some foods involves exposing products to ionizing radiation to kill pathogens and extend shelf life. While regulatory agencies consider irradiation safe, this process can destroy nutrients and create radiolytic products that are unique chemical compounds not found in non-irradiated foods. The long-term health effects of consuming irradiated foods have not been extensively studied, and current labeling requirements may not adequately inform consumers about irradiation treatment. The high-pressure processing technology that is increasingly used as an alternative to heat treatment involves subjecting foods to extremely high pressures that can kill microorganisms while potentially preserving more nutritional value than thermal processing. However, the effects of high-pressure treatment on food chemistry, nutrient bioavailability, and safety are not fully understood, particularly for foods that undergo multiple processing steps or that are stored for extended periods after treatment. The fermentation and culturing processes used in industrial food production often involve genetically modified microorganisms that have been engineered to produce specific compounds more efficiently than natural fermentation. These industrial fermentation operations can produce amino acids, vitamins, organic acids, and other food ingredients that are chemically identical to those found in nature, but are produced under conditions that may introduce contaminants or create novel byproducts. The packaging and sealing operations that preserve processed foods involve complex machinery and chemical treatments that can affect food safety and quality. The heat sealing processes used for plastic packaging can create chemical reactions between packaging materials and food contents, while the modified atmosphere packaging used for many products involves replacing normal air with gas mixtures that may affect food chemistry and nutritional properties. The cleaning and sanitization systems used in food processing facilities involve powerful industrial chemicals that are designed to kill microorganisms and remove food residues from processing equipment. These cleaning operations can leave chemical residues on food contact surfaces that may contaminate products at levels considered acceptable by regulatory standards, but that contribute to overall chemical exposure. The scale and intensity of industrial cleaning operations far exceed anything used in home food preparation. The quality control and testing systems used in food manufacturing are often designed to detect obvious contamination and verify compliance with basic safety standards, rather than to ensure optimal nutritional quality or to detect subtle chemical contamination. The high-speed nature of industrial food processing makes comprehensive quality control difficult, while economic pressures to minimize costs can create incentives to use minimal testing and quality assurance procedures. The automation and robotics systems that increasingly dominate food manufacturing can reduce some contamination risks by eliminating human contact with food, but they also create new vulnerabilities related to equipment failures, programming errors, and reduced human oversight. The complexity of automated food processing systems makes it difficult to detect and correct problems that may affect food safety or quality, while the speed of automated processing can amplify small problems into large-scale contamination events. The supply chain integration that characterizes modern food manufacturing often involves sourcing ingredients from multiple suppliers and coordinating complex production schedules that can affect food quality and safety. The just-in-time delivery systems used to minimize inventory costs can create pressure to use ingredients quickly without adequate quality verification, while the global sourcing of ingredients can introduce contamination risks and quality variations that are difficult to control. The waste stream management systems used in food processing facilities can create additional contamination risks and environmental impacts that are generally invisible to consumers. The disposal of processing chemicals, cleaning solutions, and food waste can affect local air and water quality, while also creating potential pathways for contaminants to re-enter the food supply through environmental contamination. Chapter 5: Taking Control, Making Informed Food Choices. Understanding the complex realities of modern food production empowers consumers to make more informed choices about their diets, while also recognizing the limitations and challenges involved in navigating a food system that prioritizes industrial efficiency over transparency and quality. Making truly informed food choices requires developing new skills, knowledge, and strategies that can help individuals and families access healthier, safer, and more environmentally sustainable food while working within the constraints of available options and resources. The label reading strategies that can help consumers extract maximum information from limited labeling requirements involve understanding regulatory terminology, recognizing marketing language, and learning to identify potentially problematic ingredients hidden behind vague terms. Consumers can learn to look for specific additives they want to avoid, to understand the significance of ingredient order on labels, and to recognize when terms like natural and healthy may be misleading. However, effective label reading requires accepting that current labeling systems provide incomplete information, and that many important aspects of food quality and safety are not disclosed. The ingredient avoidance approaches that some consumers adopt involve learning to identify and avoid specific additives, processing methods, or ingredient categories that they consider problematic. This might include avoiding artificial colors, preservatives, high fructose corn syrup, or genetically modified ingredients when labeling makes identification possible. While ingredient avoidance can reduce exposure to some potentially harmful substances, it requires significant time and effort to research ingredients and may not address unlabeled contaminants or processing residues. The Whole Foods emphasis that prioritizes minimally processed foods over highly processed alternatives can significantly reduce exposure to food additives, processing chemicals, and other industrial inputs while potentially improving nutritional quality. Choosing fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, minimally processed meats, and simple preparations can eliminate many of the chemical exposures associated with processed foods. However, even whole foods may contain pesticide residues, may have been treated with post-harvest chemicals, or may have been produced using industrial agricultural methods. The organic food selection strategies can reduce exposure to synthetic pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and some processing aids, while supporting agricultural practices that may be more environmentally sustainable. Organic certification provides some assurance about production methods, though it does not guarantee the absence of all chemical residues or processing aids. The higher cost of organic foods can make them inaccessible to many consumers, while the limited availability of organic options for some food categories can make consistent organic consumption difficult. The local and seasonal food sourcing approaches that emphasize foods produced nearby and consumed during their natural growing seasons can provide fresher, more nutritious options while reducing the need for preservatives, long-distance transportation, and extended storage. Local sourcing can also provide opportunities to learn about production methods and to build relationships with food producers. However, local food systems may not be available to all consumers, particularly those in urban areas, and may not provide access to the variety of foods that consumers expect year-round. The home food preparation strategies that involve cooking more meals from basic ingredients can provide greater control over food quality while reducing reliance on processed foods with unknown ingredients and additives. Home cooking allows consumers to choose ingredients, control processing methods, and avoid many of the chemical exposures associated with industrial food production. However, home cooking requires significant time, skills, and kitchen facilities that may not be available to all consumers, particularly those with demanding work schedules or limited living situations. The preservation and storage techniques that consumers can use at home can extend the shelf life of fresh foods while avoiding some of the chemical preservatives used in commercial food processing. Home preservation methods including freezing, dehydration, fermentation, and canning can maintain food quality while providing greater control over ingredients and processing methods. However, home preservation requires equipment, knowledge, and time investments that may not be practical for all consumers. The water quality attention that includes understanding and addressing potential contamination in drinking water can reduce exposure to chemical residues, microbial contaminants, and other water quality problems that affect both direct consumption and food preparation. Home water filtration systems, water quality testing, and careful sourcing of drinking water can improve overall dietary quality. However, water quality solutions can be expensive and may not address all potential contaminants. The gradual transition strategies that allow consumers to change their food choices incrementally can make dietary improvements more sustainable and affordable than attempting dramatic changes all at once. Gradual transitions might involve slowly increasing the proportion of whole foods in the diet, learning new cooking skills over time, or progressively reducing consumption of the most highly processed foods. These gradual approaches can be more psychologically and financially sustainable than dramatic dietary overhauls. The community and educational resources that can support informed food choices include local food organizations, cooking classes, nutrition education programs, and consumer advocacy groups that provide information and support for people seeking to improve their diets. These resources can provide practical skills, social support, and ongoing education that makes dietary changes more feasible and sustainable. However, the availability and quality of these resources varies significantly by location and community. The policy advocacy and consumer activism approaches that work to improve food system, transparency, safety, and sustainability can create broader changes that benefit all consumers rather than requiring individual solutions to systemic problems. Supporting organizations that advocate for better labeling requirements, stronger safety standards, and more sustainable agricultural practices can create policy changes that make healthier choices more accessible and affordable for everyone. The realistic expectations and harm reduction strategies that acknowledge the limitations and trade-offs involved in making food choices within imperfect systems can help consumers make meaningful improvements without becoming overwhelmed by the complexity of food system problems. Recognizing that perfect choices may not be available or affordable allows consumers to focus on achievable improvements while supporting broader systemic changes that can make better options more widely available. The long-term perspective that recognizes food choices as part of broader lifestyle and health strategies can help consumers integrate dietary improvements with other aspects of wellness while maintaining perspective about the relative importance of different health factors. Understanding that food choices interact with exercise, stress management, sleep quality, and other health factors can help consumers develop balanced approaches to wellness that include, but are not dominated by food concerns.